Meeting of the Finance Committee, the School Committee, and the Select Board. I'm just going to open the meeting at 6:34 and let everyone know that this meeting, is being broadcast and televised live. We are going to ask each board to open their meeting
Recording in progress.
To ensure that we have a quorum. And then we're going to have presentations. After the presentations, we're going to open it up to public comment. We're going to ask people to come up to the microphones to make your comments. We're asking people to keep it to 2 minutes so that everybody has a chance to tell us their thoughts or comments on that. And we will be listening to the feedback. We won't be responding back on that because it's a public hearing, but we'll take notes. At the end, we'll bring the questions back to the Select Board to see if they have any questions or comments, and hopefully we'll try to answer some of the questions that may have come up during the night. So we really are grateful to have you here tonight. We want to hear your feedback. And with that, I will open the Select Board meeting. And we do have a quorum with 3 of us of the 5. Patrick?
I'm going to open the Finance Committee meeting. We do have a quorum. 7 of us of the 9.
Okay. And School Committee?
We have a quorum with 5 of us, 5 of the 5.
Okay, so each of these committees are beginning the meeting now, and I'm going to turn this over to Connor Reed, our Town Administrator.
Thank you, Dottie. Should probably turn that on to get the night started. Thank you, Dottie, and thank you to the Board, the Finance Committee, the School Committee for your time tonight. Thank you to all the residents who are here with us tonight, whether you're here in person or you're following along at home, to join us for an important discussion about Easton's budget and the override. For those here tonight that I've not yet met, my name is Connor Reed. I'm your Town Administrator. This is my 9th year in that role. And during my time serving this community, I've had the great privilege over those years to be a part of a lot of celebrations and progress with you, and also the responsibility of providing you with my best counsel during times of distress. The choices that we face as a community in the next 2 months are difficult. They're not just accounting exercises about balancing spreadsheets. They're value choices that are going to have a real human impact on either side of that decision. 85% of our operating budgets are our people, our police, our firefighters, our educators and paraprofessionals, our public servants and public works who come to work every day to make Easton a great place to be. For those who have lost their job or seen their ranks in their department shrink with budget cuts, they know this is not a flowery abstraction, that this is real, that it's personal, and that it's painful. We also know that for those feeling the pain of inflation, or for those who are retired on a fixed income, that the debate about preserving public services with an override isn't as simple as whether or not they support public education and public safety, but it's about whether they will continue to be able to afford to remain in a community that they love. The architects of Proposition 2.5 more than 40 years ago recognized that capping property taxes to 2.5% a year would not be feasible forever. There needed to be a mechanism for an occasional pressure relief valve on that cap, and that mechanism is an override. And while the theory behind that mechanism is simple, its implementation is anything but. Because when would a community or a school system most need an override to support their expenses? When inflation is high. And when would a tax increase have the most negative impact on voters? When inflation is high. I highlight this to recognize that we are all working within a funding system that can sometimes make it feel like we are pitted against one another. Town departments against schools, labor against management, neighbors against neighbors. And the choices that we have to move forward can feel like they're universally painful. But what I think is more important to recognize is that while we will not all see eye to eye in a tough budget year like this one, everyone that's here tonight, whether that's your elected leaders up in front, our staff, the residents who've joined us, or those following along at home, are here because they care about Easton, they care about the Easton Public Schools, and they care about trying to make the best choice that they can given some tough options for this community. And so as we go through this hearing, and as you as voters exercise your rights in the next 2 months, I'd ask that we keep that common bond at the front of our minds. Before hearing from each of the departments and presenting the override budget, it's important to talk about how we got here, including how we've made it 19 years without an operating override in the first place. Following all those presentations, as Chair Fulgenetti has said, we'll take dedicated time for public comment, and then we'll close out with questions, follow-up from the board, and deliberations on their positions on these budgets. The budget that we face next year represents a perfect storm for Easton, one where we're struck by unprecedented inflation to health insurance, transportation, and other fixed costs, which have grown by more than 20% in only 2 years against a backdrop of nearly 2 decades of minimum state funding for public education. For those who have followed a budget process of ours before, you know that early in the year, usually in winter when we begin a draft budget publicly, that there's a gap between the forecasted expenses and the revenues we think are going to be there come July 1. We have to balance our books annually. We cannot deficit spend or borrow for operations. And so we always close that gap. The coming year in fiscal 26 is on a different order of magnitude. Typically for us, we see a preliminary deficit of about 1.5 million, which is 1 to 2% of our operating budget. The preliminary shortfall this year was 6.36 million. That's more than 4 times the size of what we usually face. And it's simply too large for Easton to innovate or reorganize our way out of. After months of work and public deliberation, we have reduced that gap to 0. But balancing that budget comes at a steep cost, and it will enact the largest cuts to education and public services in Easton since the 2008 recession, with more than 50 full-time equivalent positions reduced or eliminated. On screen, you could see the allocation by department for that funding. Fixed costs, which includes things like health insurance, regional school assessments, are 32% of the operating budget. Town departments, including general government, police, fire, public works, health, community services, the library, collectively constitute 20% of our budget, with the Easton Public Schools making up the remaining 48%. The initial request to continue level services next year from our town departments have been cut from a 5.3% increase to a meager 1.6%, removing $784,000 out of our operating budgets and cutting staff levels to the lowest that they've been in years, despite the municipal departments being busier than ever. 6 positions are cut entirely, with 0.95 FTE cut via hours reductions or moving to fee-based programming. This figure does not include cuts that we've been making along the way as the budget was getting tight. It does not include vacancies due to recent resignations or long-term injuries. And collectively, when you account for those, we'll be entering this summer with 15 fewer personnel, which is about 8% of our municipal workforce than we had last year. Coupled with the significant cuts that the Easton Public Schools are facing, it is a completely reasonable question for all of you here to say, why is this happening and how did we get here? The challenges that we face in the next 2 months are informed by where we've come from in the past 20 years. In 2006, voters in Easton approved the last operating override that we've had. This was 1 year after approving a debt exclusion for the building that we're standing in now and the Easton Middle School. Voters in Easton have for decades been very supportive and generous of their approval of debt exclusions, which can only fund specific capital projects and cannot be used to fund operations. But operating overrides have been quite rare. There have been 2. Unfortunately, 2 years after that last operating override, state revenue was cut. Now, state revenue to Easton is our second largest source of income as a community. It took 8 years after that for that second largest source of our income to recover, even in nominal dollars, not even getting into adjusting for inflation. It took 8 years for state revenue to Easton to recover. This has led to a frustrating reality for our residents, where they see their tax bill go up every year, and yet they hear the town, likely me, at town meetings saying that we're having revenue challenges. And that's because the growing taxation has been filling the gap created by those cuts to state aid years ago. State aid once provided 25 cents of every dollar needed to run the town and the school system, and now provides 13 cents of each dollar. The town sought an operating override in 2016 to address that revenue gap. Voters did not approve it, and austere operating budgets have followed for the decades since. In the years following that failed override, we continued to advance work identified in Easton's Comprehensive Facilities Repair and Replacement Program, which was funded by voters in 2013. That led to debt exclusions to build the Blanche Ames Elementary School and the police, fire, and public works projects under construction now. Each of those projects were approved by voters 3 separate times over the course of 6 years and hundreds of public meetings. Blanche Ames is complete. It was completed $13 million under budget, delivering that project at a substantially lower tax increase of $285 per year for the average house than what voters had approved in 2019, which was $433. During the 2 years specifically, when the police, fire, and public works project were voted on in 2021 and 2023, Easton's operating budget was stable. We had growing liquidity and reserves. Those operating budgets had deficits below the 5 and 10-year averages, nothing like what we're seeing today. And some of the lowest use of reserves to balance those budgets in the past 15 years. It was only in the current fiscal year 2025 that health insurance and other fixed costs broke that stability. So one might ask, why didn't Easton get a grip on that operating gap sooner? What did we do to work on that before now? The 2016 override was soundly rejected, and there was a clear message from the public on the expectation of tight operating budget management, which we have delivered on. In the years since, we've saved or avoided millions in operating costs by regionalizing services like the 911 dispatch with SEMRAC, consolidating multiple departments into one like Health and Community Services, reforming health insurance, in-housing special education, generating our own solar, and reducing our public electricity consumption by 20%. We did not sit on our hands on the revenue side either. We constructed 3 sewer districts which have contributed to Easton's best years of new growth to increase the tax levy without an operating override. All along the way, our departments and schools have accomplished a tremendous amount, providing a high quality of service with fewer dollars spent per capita than peer communities and school districts. All the way through fiscal year 2024, years into the pandemic, we were also shrinking the amount of each year's budget that was relying on reserves to close those gaps, dropping from 2.8 to 1.7%. This is all a very long way of saying we were absolutely making progress addressing the structural budget gap while still maintaining quality services that allowed us to make it 19 years without an operating override. Nonetheless, we did not take for granted that a hard budget year would never come. To the contrary, we routinely warned that it eventually would, although we could never give an exact date in the future. We find out in February what our healthcare insurance premiums will be come July. We do not get 3 or 4 year notice from the State Group Insurance Commission on what we will be paying. We spoke about it so regularly that it probably started to sound like background noise at town meetings or crying wolf. In the years since the 2016 override attempt, we made tremendous progress on our reserve position thanks not only to financial management policies, but voters who have for years in this room supported conservative budgets and voted to continuously build our reserves. Those efforts are recapped on the screen behind me. They've led to Easton's best new growth, our highest reserve fund balances, and the infrequency of overrides has also allowed Easton to have a below average annual tax bill increase of 3.5% per year compared to 4%, which is the state average, even when you account for the Blanche Ames Elementary School. This has positioned us to leverage about $3.3 million in reserves in the non-override fiscal 26 budget, a combination of stabilization funds and free cash that will meaningfully mitigate the cuts that need to be made to departments. Regrettably, the deficit is so severe that reserves alone cannot fix it, which is why budgets still needed to be reduced. The use of reserves also needs to be understood as a temporary relief valve. Those reserves are one-time funds. You cannot program recurring programs and positions with one-time funds forever. And so that ability to leverage reserves will shrink in successive years without an override leading to successive waves of additional cuts to town and school services. That leads us to where the $107 million fiscal 26 non-override budget stands today. On the screen to the right, you could see the total increases in each major revenue category available next year, and below it the increases to the 3 major expenditure categories. You'll notice that the largest increase to budgets is not for the school department or for the town departments. It is for fixed costs. This is now a 2-year trend, again, where things really have changed quite quickly for us. In fiscal 25, the year that we're currently in, the increased costs of fixed costs consumed 36% of all of our new revenue growth that year. Going into next year, fixed costs will consume half of it. Our expense capacity is being crushed by those fixed cost increases. They are not being crushed by overspending by the town departments or the school department, not from previously approved debt exclusions, and not from one department taking the lion's share of public resources from the other. When budgets get as difficult as this one has been, it's understandable for a constituent who cares deeply about a particular program or public service to question whether they are not receiving the full capacity that they know that our great staff and educators can deliver, because perhaps those funds were appropriated somewhere else or for some other need. And because our operating costs are 85% personnel, that discussion necessarily involves staffing. So it's important that we take an opportunity to look at facts about our staffing, not just what our budgets state, despite the fact that they're subject to audit, but what citizen reviews like Promoting a Sustainable Easton, or external audits, or external data sets from the Massachusetts Department of Revenue say. And here's what that data shows. That our total spending per resident is 17% below the average of Massachusetts. That Easton is the lowest amongst our 8 economically comparable communities, and the second lowest amongst our neighboring communities on our per capita spending. That Easton has fewer staff across the board, police, fire, public works, and also including school and town leadership. This was true in the 2017 operational audit, it was true in the 2020 budget subcommittee review of our finances, and it was true today with PACE's review. Publicly available information about how all 351 cities and towns manage your tax dollars from the Massachusetts Department of Revenue show that among neighboring communities with K-12 school systems like Easton, Easton has the fewest staff per 1,000 residents. Easton, the town government, and the Easton Public Schools staff 28 public employees per 1,000 residents, which is 27% below the neighbor average of 38 per 1,000. Were we to be staffing at the level of our peers, we would need to add more than 250 positions to our 700-person workforce. The data shows that Easton spends far fewer dollars per resident to serve the public and educate our children than most of our neighbors and our peers do. It staffs far fewer employees, and it does more with less across the board. Easton did not overspend its way into the challenging budget that we face, and it is not going to be able to cut its way to better services either. This then begs the question, if this is true, that Easton is run lean and that we were good stewards who built our reserves and we've done better on growth, why aren't the taxes lower? And why would we ever need to have an override? A major contributor to this seeming contradiction is the fact that nearly a third of all of Easton's land is minimally or non-taxable, and that other communities constructed sewer and other essential economic development infrastructure long before Easton started that process. This affords other communities more developable land and opportunities to generate non-residential income. Another key factor is that Easton has long been deemed what's called minimum aid by the Massachusetts education funding formula that looks at a community's property values, personal incomes, enrollment, and makes a determination on whether or not additional state revenue is required to support education. What that means for Easton is that for years and years and years, our school system, despite being an excellent one, has been entitled to the minimum amount of funding increase from the state every year, which is $30 per student. So when nearly a third of land generates little tax revenue, and 88% of the rest of it is residential, you end up with a dynamic like we have on screen. This doesn't mean that Easton or its voters have done something wrong. And to the contrary, none of this is by accident. This reflects generations of policy choices and votes of this community that have prioritized open space, historic preservation, and a residential character. These choices are good choices that lead to what makes Easton what it is today, which is a special place that's extremely desirable to live in. There are strong home values, a stable local economy, but those exact same dynamics also challenge our public finances and our ability to sustain services without an occasional override. The duration that Easton can manage without an override is heavily influenced by its posture towards growth and budget efficiencies. But there are years like this one where the gap is too large for us to navigate around. And there's two reasons for that specifically. The first of those items is shown on screen. I've alluded to it repeatedly of fixed costs. What that means is health insurance, pension assessments, and regional school assessments in Easton have skyrocketed in the past 2 years. For perspective, the 2-year, $2 million increase to our health insurance premiums is equal to the previous decade of health insurance premium growth combined. That $2 million in 2 years of growth to the cost of health insurance is greater than all of the budget increase afforded to the Easton Police Department in 10 years. When you look at the 4 items on screen that have grown by $3.5 million in 2 years, think about that number compared to our largest revenues. Non-exempt tax revenue, which is our largest revenue category, is forecast to grow by $2.6 million next year. Compare the growth of $3.5 million in those fixed costs in only 2 years to the paltry increase to the municipal departments of $332,000. The second major driver of the deficit we face is our long history as a minimum aid community, which, as I've said, entitles Easton to as little as $30 per student of new state education funding per year. That shakes out to about $100,000 of reliable state funding increase for a $50 million school budget. Had Easton's 2008 state aid simply kept up with inflation, which is what you see on screen, the blue is our actual state revenue, the red line is had it just met inflation, we would be receiving about $4 million more per year today. When you dive a little deeper to understand what does that actually mean for a school system in a community like Easton, the chart on screen shows the total state funding to the Easton Public Schools in blue bars and local funding in orange. You could tell that the blue bar does not appear to move a whole lot from 2010 to 2025, and that's because it has increased by an average of about 1% a year. In those 15 years, state aid has funded only 7.5 cents of every new dollar of budget capacity afforded to the public schools. During that same time, the percentage of the Easton Public Schools budget covered by state funding has dropped from 31% to only 22%, with local funds making up the difference. So we really have 2 core problems. One is a long-term challenge, which is those minimal increases to state aid, but one that we, frankly, have been managing for 19 years. The second problem is what has pushed us over the edge and brought us all into this room tonight. And that is that $3.5 million increase in such a short window to those fixed costs. We just can't take that kind of broadside to our operating position for more than 1 or 2 years. And very few communities can, which brings me to the final piece of this section I want to touch on. The dynamics that are at play here in Easton are happening all around us. In the past 2 years, the number of school systems in Massachusetts qualifying as minimum aid has grown to 77%, impacting the large majority of school systems and public school students in Massachusetts. It is not a coincidence that in the same 2-year window, where most communities have moved into the minimum state funding category, while health insurance costs have exploded, that the rate of overrides being sought by cities and towns in Massachusetts has doubled. This is likely cold comfort, but I think it's critical information that we all keep in mind about the broader lens on public finances in Massachusetts as we make hard budget choices this spring. Tonight you'll hear from each of our largest departments to talk about what all of this actually looks like for their departments and for Easton in specific terms. They'll primarily cover the fiscal 26 non-override budget, but they're also going to discuss how the override alternative budget would restore some of the cuts that were necessary to their departments to balance the budget. And at the end of those presentations, I'll summarize the override for the boards, and we'll take public testimony prior to board questioning and deliberation. At this time, I would like to invite the Finance Director, Wendy Nightingale, up to dive a little bit deeper into fixed costs.
Thank you, Connor. Fixed costs are the first section. Fixed costs are expenditures over which the town has little to no immediate control. They include debt service, employee benefits and insurance, including state-set health insurance premiums, county pension assessments, regional education assessments, and other costs that are not subject to appropriation, like state assessments and county taxes, which need to be factored into the budget, but they are not actually part of this presentation tonight. Fixed costs are a significant part of the budget. They encompass 32% of general fund expenditures. They've grown substantially, as Connor indicated, substantially faster than departmental operating budgets in recent years, and significant growth in these costs is one of the two drivers contributing to this year's initial budget deficit. So debt and interest, that information in the budget book is on pages 49 to 52. We break debt service, debt and interest costs into two categories, exempt and non-exempt. Exempt debt service is incurred as a result of debt exclusion override votes for a specific capital project. That debt is offset by a corresponding amount of tax revenue and does not effectively compete with the other budgets for new revenue dollars. Exempt debt will increase by $2.7 million in fiscal '26 as the municipal facilities project progresses. In this slide, you can see the breakdown of the three different projects of exempt debt that are currently factored into the budget. So the debt service for the Blanche Ames Elementary School has been effectively included in that budget at full cost since fiscal '24. We have 2 more years of debt service remaining for the high school, middle school project, and that will be paid in full in fiscal '27. Non-exempt general fund debt service is all other general fund debt for the town and school capital items like roof repairs, fire engines and ladders, heavy equipment such as hook lifts and dump trucks and roadway improvements. A full breakdown of this debt service is included in the budget book on pages 50 to 52. This debt must fit within the normal operating budget and reflects a modest increase of 3.7%. Overall, debt and interest is up 37.66, mainly due to the municipal facilities project coming online. The next section, which is the biggest section, employee benefits and insurance, which is the main deficit driver of the two. Fixed costs for employee benefits and insurance, health insurance, it covers health insurance, pension, the pension assessment, property liability, workers' comp insurance, Medicare, which is the town's match of Medicare withheld from payroll, and small transfer to the OPEB trust. As Connor indicated, these costs have gone up significantly in the last 2 years. Increases like this are not sustainable for the town, which is why this has contributed to our deficit driver. In particular, health insurance. The town is a member of the GIC, which is the Group Insurance Commission. It's a state insurance plan, and those premium increases have gone up significantly over the last 2 years. This year, the range was a low of 10.5% increase to a high of 17.2% for certain plans. There are several different plans that employees can choose from, and normally over the last few years, these increases have been relatively minimal, and we saved a lot of money by joining the GIC. If you look, the fiscal 14 to 24 annual average was about 3% increase. Fiscal 24 was 3.9, but that jumped the last 2 years to just under 20% of an increase in the budget, which cannot be sustained. And we have taken steps to mitigate this. We've adopted changes in healthcare contribution premiums for future retirees. We've worked with the Insurance Advisory Committee. We've developed an annual required contribution policy, and we've also expanded the town's insurance incentive and opt-out programs to try to mitigate these costs. The last category of fixed costs, education assessments. These are regional assessments. You've got the Southeastern Regional School and the Bristol County Agricultural High School. Mostly this cost is for the Southeastern Regional School, and the increases here, it's a combination of an increased enrollment plus an increase in the required budget that's required by the state. So the regional school, unlike Easton, the regional school is not a minimum aid school, so their budget has to increase at a greater rate than Easton's because of the Student Opportunity Act. And so because of those two different factors, our assessment is going up this year by $234,000, which is, just under a 15% increase. Overall education assessments are up by 14.7, which, is when expenses like this go up at a higher rate than your normal revenue growth, which is usually around 4%, then basically you've got to take that money, you've got to cut that money someplace else in your budget. And that's why we've had such a large deficit at the beginning of this fiscal year. Finally, enterprise funds. The town has 4 enterprise funds. I'm not going to get too much into the first 3. The first 3 really fall under the Public Works umbrella, and they'll be discussed in the Public Works presentation. But the 4th one is PEG cable access. That's essentially a pass-through account. Oops, sorry. That's in the budget book on page 130. So that is for cable access programming. It's the funds are paid to the town by Comcast and Verizon, and they're received into this fund and remitted to ECAT for community programming. And PEG is, sorry, I had that. Public education and governmental programming. So $700,000 is the amount, that's been the amount for the last few years, because we basically just need to set the amount high enough so that whatever we take in, we can then remit to ECAT. So this concludes the fixed cost and enterprise section of the presentation. I will now turn it back over to the town administrator to present the general government and health and community services and library components of the budget.
Thank you, Wendy. So general government includes the departments that are shown up on screen, what one may think of as town hall services. These departments provide services relating to financial and legal compliance, operations and community information, voting, vital records, planning, permitting, assessing and collecting taxes, administering payroll and health benefits for our employees and our retirees, and managing the town's IT infrastructure. The level service budget request for the general government departments was reduced by a net cut of $124,000 for a total budget next year of $3,268,000, which is 1.5% or $47,000 above its current funding level. It's understandable during a budget that's cutting into vital services like education and public safety to question whether those cuts cannot first be borne by administrative rules. And they have been. All of our departments in Easton, including the schools, spend fewer dollars per resident than their peers, but none have as large a disparity as general government, which spends 52% less per resident than our average economic comparable communities, and as you can see on screen, near the bottom of all communities in Massachusetts. Nonetheless, all departments had to contribute to closing the deficit in the non-override budget. So general government will cut the equivalent of 1 1/3 full-time equivalent positions. That includes eliminating a full-time position, reducing hours for another. This will result in reduced customer service hours for cash collections and bill payment. We have no dedicated grant writing staff. We'll nonetheless still need to shift the focus of the planning department. We'll currently win $3.40 in state and federal grants for every $1 of local budget that we invest in them, away from strategic and vision plans and grants to day-to-day permitting. We are canceling a planned stormwater engineer between planning and public works, which would have assisted with expedited permitting for our residents and businesses to get through some challenging permitting and state mandates on stormwater and get shovels in the ground faster and promote growth. We'll be reducing outreach like Citizens Academy, the Government Finance Officers of America, budget book, in order to retrench and focus solely on legally essential duties. Continued reductions to general government will jeopardize our ability to exercise appropriate oversight and internal control over our financial, legal, planning, risk management, and operations for the entire town government. Director Kennedy could not be here tonight, and so I'll also be summarizing Health and Community Services and touching on the Ames Free Library as well. Health and Community Services is a great example of budget efforts that Easton has made in the past decade to lead a more efficient local government. What was once 4 distinct departments with their own department heads offering often similar and sometimes overlapping services, health, Veterans Affairs, Council on Aging, and Recreation, are now under a single umbrella of Health and Community Services. This means that when the Veterans Services Officer is working with a veteran that has a transportation need, that they have immediate access to transportation staff, that transportation staff knows who to refer to Veterans and Financial Services, that when health inspectors are responding to health complaints, that they may bring an outreach coordinator or a mental health clinician. Health and Community Services has honed in on this collaborative approach, often co-responding, bringing tools for success to the residents where they are. If you or a loved one need assistance, the team at Frothingham Hall are there to help, whether that's connecting you with financial aid or with healthy, active programs. Last year, Frothingham Hall adult day programming had more than 10,000 visits, 16 weekly fitness programs, and 45 special activities and events. Community programming saw over 2,500 participants, 142 unique programs, 3,800 plus rec deck members, and 34 programs that were offered at a price of lower than $5 a day. The health staff of 2 inspectors respond to complaints. They inspect food establishments. They follow up on communicable diseases, even when there is not a pandemic happening. They inspect housing, tobacco, septic tanks, and more. Our Veterans and Financial Services work with residents to connect them with resources, whether that's $195,000 in locally administered veterans benefits per year, tax exemptions, or transportation to medical appointments and job interviews. We also have a mental health clinician who works with police and fire to support residents and connect them with the health resources that they need. Frothingham Hall is also home to the CARE team, created in the fall of 2023, the Community At-Risk Empowerment Team. It meets monthly, but it works together daily to provide supports and affect better outcomes in our community. Other communities, often larger communities, have teams like this. They typically call them a crisis intervention team. We deliberately chose not to use crisis in the name because the goal here is to avoid a crisis in the first place. This team has had a lot of success and done a lot of good. They've reduced repeat 911 calls that are resource heavy by taking proactive approaches to connect residents with the mental and physical health resources that they need, not necessarily through a 911 emergency response. The co-response model with the mental health clinician and the police community resource officer led to 259 home visits and follow-ups last year and 70 in the first quarter of this year. In order to reduce Health and Community Services budget requests without cutting into those vital but extremely limited positions I've just touched on, we will shift $55,000 in general fund staff costs into fees and grants. Those fees and grants today cover operating costs for the pool that are not funded by insufficient subscriber revenue, and will allow and will also force a reduction in some transportation options for our residents. Redirecting these funds is a hard choice, but the shift will help preserve the staff who manage more than 140 programs used by thousands of residents each year. And as you'll hear from the chiefs, cuts to the police and fire department will also impact the frequency with which the CARE team can meet, as we will not have as many team members with police and fire who are consistently available for those co-responses. The Ames Free Library budget request next year of $608,900 is a very modest $10,000 increase of 1.68% to meet state-mandated minimum municipal contributions. This funding formula from the state is shown on screen. It takes the average of your prior 3 years' contributions to the library and adds 2.5%. Due to endowments to the Ames Free Library, one of the many things that makes Easton a special place, along with donations and a small amount of state aid, Easton taxpayers fund only 40% of the Ames Free Library operating budget. Residents of Easton accordingly spend the fewest tax dollars per capita on their public library of any sales library that is similar. As you can see on screen, the sizable endowment in particular, which is represented in purple, so Easton jumps out really quick, allows the Ames Free Library to deliver value far above its cost to the public, as demonstrated by its routine receipt of national awards and honors. Given the extremely modest ask of the level service request of 1.68%, that request was not reduced in the balanced budget. At this time, we're going to start turning it over to some of the larger town departments, and I'd like to start by inviting Fire Chief Justin Alexander to the podium to talk about the fire department's budget next year. Chief.
Thank you. So here we are. At first, we're going to take you through what we thought we were going to be coming here tonight, and then we're going to take you into what actually happened. To really sum up the override cut for the fire department, it was 2 positions and a loss of about half of our training budget. But I'm going to take you through a story tonight on how we are currently, before the override even is voted, that we are already down 8 positions and will be down 9 positions in July. And how did we get to have a position where we're 4 times what was needed down in staff? And what is that doing to us? So the fire department, as we start every year with this budget hearing, we talk about what our mission is. And our mission is always the same: to protect people, property, and the environment. And in any scenario tonight, we're still going to do our job to the best of our ability to do that. We've been serving you I put this slide up every year. For those of you who are new to this hearing, I like seeing the number go up. I'm not sure if that makes me feel older or more prideful or a little bit of both, but 131 years of dedicated service to all of the residents of Easton. We're very proud of that. We serve about 4,383 calls a year. That's a record. We've had this record every year for a bunch of years now. You'll see that coming up in some of the slides that we have. So we're doing more runs with, you'll see, very similar staffing, and we'll talk a little bit about how staffing works for the fire department so you can understand how we operate, because it's fairly complex because of the way we run, the way the fire service works in 24 hours a day and 4 shifts. And we'll talk about how we deal with those 4,383 runs every year. So one of the things we talk about is minimum staffing. What is our minimum shift level? Our minimum shift level currently is 8. That means we have 8 firefighters across 3 stations, and we staff those 8 for 4 shifts. So there's 4 shifts of minimum staffing of 8. In the current FY25 budget, we have budgeted 11 firefighters working. But with vacation time, holiday time, sick time, injuries, we will run that shift down to 8 with no cost of overtime. Those positions, we just don't fill them. There's no overtime cost. And that's how we get to that 8. But when you have the time off and all these things that add up, we're routinely at the 8. So we use the minimum shift level as a guide to show you how we are, because we're constantly at that 8. To tell you we have 11 is disingenuous. Yes, it's on paper, but it's so rare that we're there that it's important that you understand that we talk about the minimum. So you know what you're going to get on any day, not just on a day when, by chance, no one took a vacation day. So when you look at the 9 comparable towns that we use, and you heard earlier in the presentation, with the exception of Ashland, we have less firefighters working. We use a per capita to talk about it. So we have 1 firefighter for every 3,176 residents. And we use that as a metric to try to just explain how many people we protect with every firefighter. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't put all of them on one very important, high acuity call where a structure fire might need everyone, or a medical emergency might just need 4. But in the end, we have to try to provide some way to explain what are we doing and how are we stretching our 8 firefighters working at a minimum shift day over 29.2 square miles and just about 26,000 residents. And that's what's important. And you'll see those comparable towns, how the ratio changes quite dramatically as you go up. Dedham, Foxborough, Canton, Marshfield, those are our comparable towns, but yet they have more firefighters per person. That's why those ratios change. So minimum staffing, so we're going back to 2012, and we'll talk a little bit about this because the last time we changed this minimum level was in 2012. We started to pick up the second ambulance then, and we brought the minimum staffing to 8 for our shifts that had 10. And that's where we were at. But what's really important is our minimum staffing, which we're at regularly, hasn't gone up since then, but our ambulance run volume has gone up 108%. So we're somehow every day going out 2-3 times at the exact same time, 2 or 3 calls at once, trying to deal with it, make it work, and they do a great job. And up till recently, our mutual aid need, the need from other communities, has been low. And we've been able to keep up, which means we're doing a good job. We're getting out of the hospital. We're coming back for another run and taking care of all of you. And that's what we want. We want to keep that. And in the override passing scenario, that's what we would keep. There's a little bit of hurdles to get to fix that, but that's the positive side. We can continue that great service that all of you have come to recognize and expect, and we want to keep giving that to you. And the non-override scenario, it becomes much more challenging to hold this because we're doing 108% more runs with the same minimum staffing. And at some point, we're stretched to the point that we just can't keep up. If you're juggling, for the more we have to do with less firefighters, is just adding more balls for the proverbial juggler, and eventually we try so hard not to drop one, but we're fearful of that, and we don't want that to happen, and we want to be there for all of you, and that's the problem. So even outside of the override discussions, we were already stretching already. And we worked on a couple of solutions to deal with that. So, and there's another slide here to show you how the run volume's gone up. And this shows you our mutual aid need. So it's you can see how in the green, 1.7 is good, 2% is good. We mark yellow because it's showing a trend. But we're doing that trending up before we've even had an override cut, non-override cut. So that's not going to bode well going forward in future years. So where I want to get to now for the remainder of my time is, well, I gave you some facts, but what does it actually mean to you and us? What happened? Why are we already at such a deficit of firefighters and struggling and talking about closing a fire station when we haven't even voted an override or not? What happened was perfect storm. We recognized, Deputy Carroll and I, with your support at town meeting, with the support of the select board, the finance committee, recognized that, boy, we had an awful lot of overtime money out there. We were using a lot of overtime. There was a lot of forced overtime on our firefighters, and we wanted to do something about that. We recognized that we were at a threshold where if we hired 4 more firefighters within our existing budget without asking for more money, just reallocating from overtime to salary, we could run our shifts at 11, and then we would drop to that 8, which gives you that buffer I talked about earlier of 3. So when you start at 11, 3 people take the day off, there's no overtime. But occasionally, you don't always have 3 off, so you get the benefit of having 9 working or 10 working or occasionally all 11, which is great. That's what we want. We provide great protection, pick up those ambulance calls, the firefighters are safer, and that's the ideal scenario. So we went with that 2 years ago. With all of your support, it's a great plan, and lo and behold, we found ourselves to be super marketable. We had good staffing levels, our equipment was improving with your support, the building project was coming, so we became marketable. So we had to hire these positions between those 4 positions and retirements. We all of a sudden got a bunch of transfers because people wanted to come here. They wanted to be part of this fire department. They wanted to be part of this community, and they came. And we hired a bunch, and they were great people with 10 years of experience, 5 years of experience, academy-trained paramedics. It's so hard to get paramedics right now. The fire service is so competitive. So with that, what happened was the override and the budget cuts became right in everybody's face. You all know, you're here tonight, you're participating, you're learning about this, or you know about it. So did the firefighters. And all those people who transferred here, even with the good stuff that was coming, realized that their jobs were possibly in jeopardy because we lay off people in reverse order. The junior person is laid off first. And we have a young fire department with young families. There's been 21, in my 4 years with you, there have been 21 babies born to our department. We're proud of that. It's wonderful. And that means we have young families within the fire service in Easton, and there's a lot of considerations there. They're worrying about their families, they're worrying about scheduling, and are they going to lose their job, and what are they going to do? And they had to take that look in the mirror, and they did. And they had to decide to go somewhere else that was going to give them that stability so that they could support their families and be there and know they're going to have a job and not wonder what's going to happen. And they also have been paying attention. And if the override doesn't pass, there's $3 million more that has to be cut from the budget. Where's that going to come from? They know that's going to impact the fire department again. So even hanging on, that makes us not marketable to even backfill those positions. So even if, Mr. Reed said, hey, go hire to try to fill some of these holes you have, who's going to come here? Who's going to come here right now? Because we can't promise them they're going to have a job next year. So we're not marketable. So now we're stuck with lack of staff, the inability to get staff, and trying to cover 3 stations in 29.2 square miles and 26,000 people in a college. All of these things don't work together. So where are we going to do? Well, we got to plug a couple of the holes. We have to close Lothrop Street Station right around the corner. We need to condense our firefighters that we have left into 2 stations. That's the model that's going to happen when the new buildings come online, but we have to do it. We have to take them through it. We have to go through it. And that'll provide a more robust model. It'll let our firefighters be able to actually not be like, oh, I wish we had that truck that's at Lothrop Street, but because we're not there, we've got to drive and get it. We're going to move the trucks to places at Bay Road and Depot Street to let them be a real fire department and not just have 2 people at a fire station. Because those who don't know, our Depot Street station right now and Bay Road only have 2 firefighters in them. When Bay Road goes out for an ambulance call, which is almost all the time, guess who's in that station? Nobody. So that means anybody who lives on Foundry Street down by the Norton line, they're coming from Lothrop, they're coming from Depot, or maybe coming from Norton Fire. And that's not a scenario we want. So we need to condense into the 2 stations, which will put a staffed engine covering Southeastern, which is what we need to do. As your fire chief, we need to cover Southeastern and Northeastern, and this is the best we can do with what we have, and it's going to protect us the best that we can. But that's happening now. That's happening because we have to do it. We've been put in this place even before the override, even if it passes. So now let's talk about where we're going to go. So when we come into the override, let's say it passes. That's a wonderful thing for us. It's going to be good. We still have some hurdles because we have to become marketable again, convince people they need to come here. We have to bring them in, train them, get them online because we can't put them out there until they've been trained. This takes a year. So it'll be great to bring these people back, and that's a wonderful thing, but we still need to do what we're going to do with the fire stations and condense because we know we're not going to have that staff, even if we could wave a magic wand today to hire them. So the impact to the fire department starts now. It doesn't start in July. It doesn't start on June 11th. It doesn't start in September. It starts now. And we have to do something to protect all of you, and that's what we're going to do. So although a lot of doom and gloom and talk, and I don't want anybody to be scared, like we are still going to come for you. I don't like to use scare tactics, but I need to tell you the truth. And that's a hard line for me to walk as your fire chief. But the help may be from Stoughton if they're available, or from Norton if they're available, or West Bridgewater if they're available, because sometimes we're just not going to be able to keep up. But by doing what we're doing and what I talked to you about tonight, that's how we're going to provide you something starting in July in any scenario to keep you as safe as we possibly can given what we have with the record run volume and double the ambulance volume and everything else that we're experiencing. So we have a plan in any scenario to protect you. One is obviously better than the other, but we will still be there for you. Thank you. So now I'm going to have Chief Boone come up now for the police presentation.
Good evening, everyone. For those that don't know me, my name is Keith Boone. I'm your police chief. A little bit about me. I began with the police department in 2002, so I'm entering my 23rd year with the town in the police department, and I'm approaching my 3rd year as police chief. So over those 23 years, I've seen peaks and valleys with budgets, and we've been through this before. So like the Chief Alexander just said, we're going to be here for everybody, regardless of how things shake out with the budget. We're going to be here. You need us. We're going to help you. I want to make that very clear. So as we get underway, I always like to put up our mission statement. There's a lot of text in these words, and I won't bore you by reading it all, but one line that always I feel is most important is that the police officers that work for this town show up to work every day is striving to deliver the best police services possible. And that's going to continue. And in times like these, we like to remind people that our commitment is unwavering. So I'd like to provide a snapshot of where we were 10 years ago from where we are today. And we use the 10-year data set. Internally, it's a good measuring point for us to see where we were 10 years ago. It helps us evaluate call volume, trends. And the second reason we're using it is because FY26 is going to result in the same amount of allocated personnel that we did have in 2014. So I think it's good to look at these numbers over a 10-year period where we're going to have the same staff showing up to work. And if you can, again, this is just a snapshot. This isn't all of our general calls for service or categories. But it is important to look at and see the significant increase in some of those areas. Department staffing, you've heard about where we are versus our comparables in all the departments. But if you look at the average, you'll see that 46 full-time officers are in these other towns we compare ourselves to. It will be dropping to 37 in just a few months. Our command staff is reduced, and it's always been reduced, and since I've been the chief, it's something I've always advocated for, that we need to bolster our command staff. We run with a chief, a deputy chief, and one lieutenant. In the last 3 years, we've separated from civil service. We have different recruitment initiatives we need to do, and we have an entire body-worn camera program that we need to dedicate lots of hours to. Our per capita spending remains at the bottom. And just to put this in perspective, if we were to staff at the average of where our comparable communities are, I would be up here asking you for an extra $800,000 in our budget. And we're not doing that, I promise. We're not going to ask that. But that's just to give you where we are. We've historically been understaffed since I began with the police department. And as the added saying goes, that's just how it's been in Easton. So what does FY26 look like for us? Our total budget is $5,429,371, and it's made up of 37 police officers. It includes the step increases and the COLAs in accordance with our collective bargaining agreements and our non-union wage scales. But it's important to note that these 37 officers, we'll only be having 36 show up to work in July. We do have an officer that was deployed through the military. I don't expect him to be back this calendar year or possibly even longer than that. So that gets us back to the 36 officers I was referring to in 2014. Our original budget included 38 officers. Our expenses were level funded, but we did need to cut $200,000 to help balance the town's budget. So where did the $200,000 come from? So we cut one police officer position to drop us to 37. That'll be our second police officer that we've cut in 2 years. So for the police department, this began last year for us. So we're in year 2 of losing staff. It also reflects one less detective, reducing our community outreach assignment to 1 or no days per week, depending on how this shakes out, and reducing our overnight shift by 1 officer. So what does it look like when we cut our detective division? We can anticipate lower solvability rates and a reduced capacity to investigate anything beyond the essential investigations. Sexual assaults, death investigations, and crimes of violence are what we classify as essential. And while we were talking about our comparable communities earlier, we're already at a disadvantage in our detective unit, where you'll see, comparing ourselves to Norton, Mansfield, and Foxborough, our regional dispatch towns that we like to compare ourselves to internally. They all have 5 detectives right now that handle court and their investigative services. We run 4 right now. We'll be at 3 in July. And so when I say things that are essential, just to give you an example, for all of those here that follow us, I know you follow us on social media and you see all of our posts, of course, and maybe some news clips. You know, over the last few years, our detectives did solve a multi-vehicle theft ring that involved several states and federal agencies after Bourne's Auto had several exotic cars stolen. So we were able to do those things because we can dedicate the hours when we have the staff. Everyone, I'm sure, saw the news 4 months ago. We did have a shooting. And when something like that happens, everything stops in the police department. All of our investigators go to that. That is the priority, and everything else stops. Thankfully, we have a great team of investigators. We were able to identify suspects and make arrests. What people don't know is while that was going on, we also had 2 victims of sexual assault come into the police station. And so one detective that is offering support to the lead investigator now has to be peeled off to prioritize these victims and organize forensic interviews with the district attorney's office. So there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes that we don't advertise those things, but I think it's important to know that these are happening in our town regularly and we have to address them. So what does it look like when we lower staffing on our overnight shift? With our community outreach. So you've heard the town administrator talk about the overlap with fire and community services. And it goes even deeper than that. He's being modest. We work with the assistant town administrator. We work with the building department. Our Board of Health can be doing an inspection at a home and come across a hoarding situation. And those are very common to find a veteran who's given up and doesn't know what the services are that are available. So we're able to prioritize some of those things and offer different resources, and we have a lot of success stories when it comes to that. The way we've strategized that is we've taken an officer out of staffing and we put him with our community outreach officer, with our paramedicine program, with our clinician, and they'll do what I call relentless follow-ups. And we try to address these problems before the first time we're dealing with someone is when they're calling 911 for help. And we've had a lot of success. It's something we're really proud of, and we're 3 years into really pulling this off. So what does our overnight shift reduction look like? Since 2012, we increased our staffing. So 13 years ago, we were running one officer inside and 3 on the road. And we had the need back then to increase that staffing, and we did. So July 1st, we will be going back 13 years and having 1 officer on the desk and 3 on the road available for calls. And I struggle with that, and we looked at different opportunities where we could maybe have a dark station. You've heard me say that before in different presentations, where towns around us may close the police station. You'll have a call box out front, and the dispatch center can send a police officer back to the police station parking lot to help you. I find that completely ridiculous, and we're not going to do it. I think we're better than that in Easton. And as a resident and the chief, to actually think you couldn't find a police officer at the police station at 2 o'clock in the morning it's upsetting to me. But what does that look like for our officers? I can anticipate an increased response time in some of these calls, extra workload for the remaining supervisors on shift, and really the most important thing is the inability to respond to priority calls. So we classify calls 1, 2, and 3, and a priority call would require 2 officer response. Domestic violence, for instance. Right now, if we have a priority call and 2 officers are there, we have the ability to take another priority call. That's going to change in July. And while we're not going to not respond, it just puts the officers in a vulnerable position. And so that 1 officer will be coming, but he'll also be calling West Bridgewater, Mansfield, or Norton, depending on where the call is originating from, to back us up. We've also cut our modest expense lines, which haven't increased in nearly 10 years and have never increased since I've been the chief. Expenses make up 6% of the police department's overall budget. Again, a common theme you'll hear tonight, we're all people. 94% of the police department are the police officers that show up to work. But we did cut our community events line, our matron line, and consulting services, and we reduced our overtime by $40,000. So cutting community events, some of the things we do with that money, parades, Veterans Day parades, Memorial Day parades, trunk or treat events with the school. Any opportunity we have to interact with the community, that's what we try to do, and that's where we use that funding source to compensate the staff. The consulting services, you heard me say earlier, we left civil service a few years ago. That was targeted for recruitment. Probably a taboo word right now, but it was targeted for recruitment, selection process, medical testing, psychological testing, and promotional testing. That all comes with a cost, and so we're not hiring, we all know that, but we won't even be in a position to have a promotional exam if we did have a ranking officer retire. And the biggest one here is our $40,000 reduction in overtime. So we can't just cut $40,000 and send everybody into work and say, yeah, we're just going to hope it works out. So that's why we targeted the midnight shift. We feel that by lowering the minimum staffing on that shift, it will reduce the replacement costs, because we can't just have nobody show up to work. We have to order people into work if it's not voluntary. By lowering that amount to 3, we're hoping that cushion takes care of us with the reduction of $40,000. So the override budget, if it passes, what will it look like? It's a modest increase to the police department of $223,850. Really what it's going to do is get us back to 39 police officers. It's going to restore our overtime, restore our community events, restore our matron, our consulting services. It's going to give me the ability to move a patrol officer into detectives, assign a court officer, something we haven't had since 2015, restore our community outreach commitment, and then restore our midnight shift staffing. So that is our goal. But as Fire Chief Alexander just mentioned, regardless of how this plays out, your police department is here to help you, and we're coming when you need us, I promise.
Thank you, Chief. Dave Field, Director of Public Works. Just going to give a real brief overview of the scope of what DPW handles and talk about our budget. Currently, DPW is staffed at 40 full-time equivalents through 4 divisions. We handle road maintenance, 117 miles of public road. We do 1 million miles of line striping every year. We supply 625 million gallons of water last year to 7,600 active services, and we perform 93,000 meter reads. We handle snow and ice. We remove snow and ice from 17 million square feet of pavement. And we handle building maintenance on all town and school buildings. That's 838,000 square feet of building space. And last year we completed over 1,200 work orders. We handle grounds maintenance for both school and town facilities, 42 acres of sports fields, 176 acres of general mowing, the high school turf field, 29 cemeteries. We take care of trees. We are a tree city. Last year we removed 655 trees and trimmed another 223. We maintain 136 town vehicles, including police, town hall vehicles, some COA vehicles. We manage the Geographic Information System, or GIS, for the entire town. And we handle the sewer district. There's 3 sewer districts that collected over 27 million gallons last year, including the North Easton Village wastewater treatment plant, 4 separate pump stations, a siphon, and an odor control station. We manage the stormwater for the entire town, over 5,000 drainage structures and 391,000 linear feet of drainage lines, including catch basin cleaning, street sweeping. We manage the solid waste program for the town. We handle all the billing for the 4,700 subscribers, and we handle all the cart delivery and repair for everyone's recycle and trash carts. We maintain the town streetlights. We own our streetlights, over 1,400 of them, and last year we maintained 69 streetlights. We handle in-house engineering, design, permitting, survey, and layout, and we're currently managing $190 million in capital projects. Some of these special projects include designing and constructing a new septic system at Town Hall, designing the replacement and construction administration of the OA courts, which tonight you can see are being actively used. And special projects like constructing our first water treatment plant at Red Mill Road. and the Public Works and Public Safety facility. Then there's the miscellaneous things we do. Operate our landfill. There's an active gas collection and flare system there, and there's air, groundwater, and surface water monitoring that's required to be done quarterly. We administer grant programs like Green Communities and small bridge programs. We handle traffic safety evaluations and health and safety for our employees. We do Arbor Day tree plantings, Household Hazardous Waste Day. We set up all the elections and even graduation setups. And probably our most important role as an emergency responder. DPW is considered a first responder by FEMA, and unfortunately, as you know, we've had too many issues in the past. Just recently, we had a large sinkhole on Bay Road, which required immediate attention, and in July of 23, we had a tornado. So with that said, I'll dive into the budget. Overall, the DPW has about a $12 million budget across many line items. Most of these are, 70% of them are enterprise funds. So these are funds where the fees collected can only be used to pay for those services. So that's sewer, water, and trash. And the remaining 30% is our general fund budget. Out of that general fund operating budget, 63% of that is salaries, 24% is expenses, and 13% is snow and ice. So our first budget line item is the DPW administration. There's a $405 cut to that item. In buildings and grounds, we're eliminating one position, and there's an overall 1% increase to buildings and grounds. On the highway side, we're also eliminating a position, and there's a cut of 3.5% or $48,000 to the highway budget. Snow and ice, there is no change. Water enterprise, there is a modest increase for debt service and salary adjustment of 0.9% increase to water enterprise, but again, this is not a general fund item. The solid waste and recycling has no change in it. The sewer enterprise has a slight increase due to debt service. So the DPW overall, we continue to work with fewer bodies than are recommended. We do need additional funding. We've been saying this for years to adequately fund and maintain our biggest assets, our buildings, our roads, our fleets, et cetera. And deferring replacement doesn't save money, it costs more money in the end. Just a couple of DPW staffing metrics. We currently have, we should have 17 full-time equivalents to maintain our buildings and our school buildings. We have 6 currently, and after this budget, we'll have 5. Vehicle maintenance, we should have 6.5 mechanics. We have 2. The highway division was the second lowest staffed in the operational audit, and DPW was the lowest at that time. And comparing our core communities, as you've seen the other departments do, we're 5th out of 6 for our neighboring communities and 6th out of 9th for our core communities. So we definitely spend less than our neighboring communities and peers. So the override contingent budget would restore a total of $148,000, 77 to the DPW, and it would restore 1 out of the 2 positions being eliminated. The other costs would go into restoring some expense cuts. That's all I have. Thank you.
Sorry, that was a long runway. I am Dr. Alicia Cabral. I am the superintendent of schools here in Easton, and I will review the final budget this evening for the Easton Public Schools Department. First of all, just starting, we realize that many of you, whether you have had children or grandchildren or neighbors in the district in the past, may not have any now. And just to give you a tiny bit of context of where we are before we begin the budget, we are down to 4 schools, same enrollment virtually. It's gone up and down in different places, but when I first came here 12 years ago, we had 7 schools. We've been combining them. We have 4 now with just over 3,400 students. We range from ages 3 to 22. We have 583 staff members currently. We have 80 clubs and activities for our students and 51 sports teams representing many different areas, very robust offerings for our students, which make them very well-rounded and get into wonderful colleges, universities, service in the military, and work after school. These are comprised of visual arts, performing arts, academic pursuits, community services, student government, leadership, many things for many students, which are very important when we're trying to engage students in the learning process. We also have many awards for a lot of these activities, as you've seen probably in the news, championships for our athletic teams, our performing visual arts, robotics, many awards state and nationally. And I say these because when we're looking at how much we are utilizing for resources, we just want to make sure that people understand that our staff, our educators, our support staff, our administrators are doing an awful lot with our students, with your children, and they should all be recognized for that for sure. Independent evaluations of the district will show things like this. We're in the top 18% of Massachusetts. Just to be clear, when we talk about the achievements of Oliver Ames High School, we are very purposefully talking about every grade that leads up to it, as well as the infrastructure and the support of the town. The state and the country do not use metrics for other school levels. It's for high schools, and so that's why we're using the high school metrics. We are, last year, top 20% in Massachusetts, top 12% in the United States, currently ranked 35, or the most recent ranking, has increased steadily over the last few years, and what Boston Magazine calls the bang for your housing buck for high schools. That is something that they use called the honor roll for top high schools, and I don't know if you can see it here, but basically they select institutions whose high schools rankings most significantly surpass the ranking of their respective median household price. We are in the top 4 there. Also, I will add number 1 in Bristol County. All of this comes from community input in things like our strategic plan. So our strategic plan comes in 5-year increments, the most recent ending in 2004. We are now beginning our next 5-year plan. This was a year-long process with the Department of Education Planning for Success model, with many constituents from virtually every stakeholder group in and around the community, and dedicated an awful lot of time to helping us come up with our new vision and our goals for our school department, focused on teaching and learning, communication and community engagement, and campus unity and climate. These can be found on our Easton Public Schools website. So when we plan anything, whether it is services for our staff, for our students, for our community, and our budget, we always start with this seminal text. We also have our first equity statement and equity commitments. We heard loud and clear from our constituents that creating an environment that removes barriers for students and creates accessibility for every student to reach their full potential was a priority, and so we have that in mind as well. Our process involves every staff member at our staff meetings. It begins in the center with our strategic plan, always. We spend 2 staff meetings, typically January and February or thereabouts, where the staff engages in the process of looking at the strategic plan and determining what gaps in achievement still need to be fulfilled and what resources may be needed in order to accomplish that. And so this happens every year as part of our budget creating process. You can see that that then turns into principal presentations to the central admin leadership team. We review that as a district because what may be a very serious priority in one school may pale in comparison to the priority of another school. And so we determine that at the district level with the principals of each school. That is then returned back to the principals, who are asked to share that out with the staff for a final review, and then public presentations like this one begin. What we use when we talk about how we set our goals for a budget are these target definitions. We focus primarily on reactive, essential, proactive, and strategic. Reactive meaning these are the staff and the resources that are needed as a reaction to a current need or mandate. This is not a prediction. This is not something that we think is coming. It's already a problem. We've either been cited or we have some corrective action that needs to be done, and we need to fulfill that need. This doesn't even always fulfill the mandate, but it gets us steps in the right direction. Proactive is preparing for an imminent or developing need. We follow legislation very closely, and when it requires a shift in laws or it requires a shift in mandates for our students, our classrooms, our curriculum, our programs, then we try to stay ahead of it. Anything that isn't funded proactively ultimately becomes a reactive need if it isn't addressed. And strategic is planning for the really complex needs of the future. Certainly now you can see with AI, technology, social media, mental health needs, things are changing constantly in education and trying to stay on top of that. For the 12 years that I've been here, the Easton Public Schools has been firmly in reactive and essential only. We have never moved to proactive or strategic. We always operate in requests to meet reactive needs. Twice, including this year, we have actually been in regressive. I created the definition for regressive the first time we were there because we realized we were actually going below reactive. We were not able to meet the reactive needs and mandates that we were being given, whether it was from the Department of Elementary Secondary Education, the state of Massachusetts, or the federal government. This year, we're in the lowest level of regression that we've ever seen, which is not surprising when you hear what's happening at the state and national levels. This means reducing or eliminating staff and resources. It restricts access to programming, reduces non-core content areas. It essentially sends the district backwards in terms of what we're able to offer and provide both to our students and our staff. You can see the seeds of this in past presentations. I won't go over any slides from last year's presentation. I just put this here as a reminder that this presentation, as well as all of the presentations we've done, can be found either on the town website, but also on our district website on our business office page. As Town Administrator Connor Reed said, in February, we were advised to come up with level service budgets in his first budget memo. And when we did that, only taking the payroll rollover, which means all of the current and existing staff to the next year with contractual obligations, increases in salary, increases in education, that came out to 5.7%. That doesn't mean that there was a 5.7% across the board increase. In fact, we average around 2% every year. But those that's the rollover for the current staff or staff needed for leveling service. In other words, if we have 10 sections of a grade 1 class, if 20 more students come into the district, offering an 11th section is level service because we're still teaching first graders. It's just maybe the number has changed. It also includes 2.5% for increases in expenses and operational contracts, mostly transportation, but you will see some of the other budget drivers in our upcoming slide. I'm just going to add what those increases were. I'm not going to bury the lead. These are things that increased as quickly as Connor Reed described. Things increased at the town level. So we had salary contractual obligations, which when these presentations started hadn't been fulfilled yet, and so that was kind of left blank, but that is settled at this point. Education for out-of-district students or students that are beyond the capacity for the Easton Public Schools to educate in-house, that has gone up 19% in 2 years. Similar to what Town Administrator Reed described with health insurance, the decade before this, the average increase was about 2% a year. But in 2 years, it went up 14% last year, completely unexpectedly, and then another 5% this year, for a 2-year increase of 19%. Again, administrative legal obligations and compliance, we refer to these as the unfunded mandates of the government. They're literally unquantifiable because there are so many of them. Transportation contracts, this is for students receiving special education, but also our big bus, what we call our big bus contracts to get students back and forth to school, increased almost 11%. And you can see health insurance is represented in here as well. The free meals reimbursement program, the reason it says current proposed reduction is because our state budget, we actually will not know those figures until after town meeting. But every year, since we've had the free meals program, the government provides free breakfast and lunch for all students. However, it has the words contingent upon appropriation, meaning basically if the government can afford it. This year, the first pass of the governor's budget does not have the full funding for that program. So we are trying to quantify now exactly how much that's going to cost, because when it isn't free, even though we charge for lunches, it doesn't pay for the full program. And so, and some students qualify under the federal formula to not have to pay for lunch. And so we have to provide that to them by law. And so this is going to run in a deficit if this stays the same until the state budget comes out. And then our fee structures. We don't increase those regularly. We try to make sure that the facilities, which are meant to be community facilities, are very accessible to everyone, and that our students are able to participate in clubs, activities, and sports freely. Unfortunately, they don't cover the cost of those. It would be impossible for them to be high enough to cover the cost, and so we will never actually be able to get to that point. What this may result in is not in this budget, but should we continue on this trajectory, it would result in much higher fees, but also a lower number of offerings for students. We just would not be able to afford running them all. In terms of our per pupil expenditure, when we talk about running lean, these are the metrics that we use for the school department. The Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed, or what I'll refer to now as DESE, has a per pupil metric that they use. The town uses per capita, for instance, but we use two comparisons. One is our neighboring districts. One of the reasons we use that one is because this is who we are competing with most often for our very valuable employees. And so it's important that we remain competitive. You can see that of all of our bordering neighbors, we are second to last in our per pupil expenditure. These are figures that are determined by the Department of Education after a school year. So this is the just released 2023 numbers. The reason I'm saying that is this year we're about $17,000 per student. The state average is over $20,000 a student. Some people have understood that to mean that the town of Easton pays $17,000 for every student. That's actually not accurate. It means that after the year is over, once we've assessed what the state has provided in terms of Chapter 70 funding, what we have gotten from the town of Easton and other funding sources, then we just divide it by the number of students we have, and that tells you your per pupil expense. The short end of the story is more students is better for us. So building in town, better for the school system. We get more money from the government for every student that we have. So financially, it's better. Also, projects like Avalon or other building projects bring tax revenue into town and also develops new growth. All of these things benefit the school department as well. If you look at our DART districts, DART is the comparison that the Department of Education makes. So they choose the school districts in Massachusetts that they are going to compare Easton to in terms of our students' achievement. So our students are being compared to the students in these districts, and again, you can see that we are dead last in this group, but we outperform the state regularly. So just to set that context for you. And again, with the state being over $20,000, if we were to just receive the amount of money that the state average is, just the school department would have an additional over $12 million a year just for the school department. That's a huge percentage of our $51 million budget. So yes, we are doing more with less. Yes, I know a lot of people take a great deal of pride in that, and we will continue to make that commitment, but it is not sustainable forever. What we're doing now is what is resulting in the education and the experience that students are getting, and as you know, as homeowners, makes your home value increase because people are moving in, especially now with the new school, people are moving in to attend Easton Public Schools, which is good for the town, is good for everyone. This updated memo then, however, left us with a $2.289 million deficit. And so that original 8.2% needed to be decreased by just over $3 million. We endeavored to work through attrition, retirements, resignations, move people around the district, and we also offered an incentive program, and we're very fortunate that we were able to do that because it limited the number of people that were affected. Unfortunately, we had a large number of reductions in our district, and I will talk about those, but we really tried to exhaust every opportunity to avoid impacting students and, of course, impacting our very valuable staff. That gave us the bottom line budget request of $51.5 million or 3.6%. So the school department's request of level service budget at 8.2 has been reduced to 3.6. This, however, is changing every day. For a school department, we're not on a calendar year, we're on a school business year, and the summer is very telling for us. And I'm just giving one example of kindergarten in there. We reduced $76,741 more than we needed to get to a balanced budget with the town, but that money is already basically committed because of this one example of kindergarten. We now have more pre-K and K enrollments than ever before, which, as I said, is a good thing for the schools because we receive more money from the state for having that. However, it also means we may need to add kindergarten teachers or paraprofessionals. The thing is, we don't know that right now, and we don't know that when the budget is voted on. Every year, we take a very educated guess based on longitudinal data and our outreach to communities. But there are some things, or to our community, but there are some things that are almost impossible to predict. For example, how many 4 or 5-year-olds there are in town that maybe don't come to our preschool and we literally don't know that they are alive at this point. And a lot of times, despite our best efforts to advertise, parents don't really think about kindergarten until the summertime. And so we have to stay aware of that. Also, our special education costs. We don't know when a child may qualify for special education needs, and we certainly don't know when a student may move into our district that could have a very high level need. And as I referenced earlier, out-of-district costs can go anywhere between a day program that could be $35,000 a year to a residential program that is over $300,000 per year per child. And that doesn't include the transportation expense of the day programs. So you can see how our budget can shift literally by $500,000 very quickly just by the students that move in or out of our district. So if we talk about the things that we need to reduce for next year, 85% or almost 87% of our budget is made up of people. We are a human industry. Another almost 15% are fixed costs. That means utilities, trash disposal, paper, things of that nature. So we have very little bit of discretionary spending. We are reducing some stipends, but also you can see materials and subscriptions. When we had the pandemic, we were able to go to a one-to-one district, which means that every student was able to get a device, and the staff has been very creative and very forward-thinking about creating programs that the students can use, the software that the students can use, so that they can be competitive with their peers in our digital society. Unfortunately, we are not going to be able to sustain that as those devices are now dying off. We are going to have to eliminate the one-to-one program from grades K to 7. So students will not actually be given devices in Easton schools until grade 8. We, of course, always have access programs so that if there is a need for a student to borrow a device for a program or a mandated assignment, of course, we will have a borrowing program, but we just can't sustain the model any longer. You can see other seemingly small things, but we clearly left no stone unturned, but they all add up, and so these are some of the materials and subscriptions that we have to reduce. As I said, the lion's share is going to be people because that is the lion's share of our budget. I just want to speak for a moment about the process because I want to assure you that the dedicated individuals that work for this district, the process that was used was really the most sensitive and coordinated that we could possibly muster under the circumstances. These are valued members of our community who really make the Easton Public Schools what they are. And we worked in cooperation with our unions. We made sure that everyone was clear that all of the reductions that are taking place happen at the end of the school year, so that is in June. We went through attrition and incentives, as I said. In the reduction process itself, we took great pains to make sure that it was as fair, equitable, and precise as possible. We provided advance notice, and we had individual meetings at each school with a union member, the principal, and a central office team member. We provided human resources information from our director of human resources, and then provided opportunity for people to process, meet with their union rep if they'd like, and certainly not return to duties if they did not feel they were able to do that. We also made sure that our town social worker was present. As you can imagine, this is a really emotional process. Voluntary and involuntary transfers happened next. And then what we're doing now is working on the redistribution of responsibilities. We still have to get the work done. We still have to serve our kiddos, and we're going to do that. As positions open, they may be posted. People should not see this as we've somehow found money. Positions are going to continue to be vacated by staff members, but there are also positions that that need to be filled. So, for example, if we didn't have an incentive, we didn't have a retirement or a resignation in a particular area, we still need to fill that area. These are our total staffing reductions. It's a total of 44.81 FTE, which means a full-time equivalent. That was a happy scream, don't worry. Unfortunately, while we were able to, as I said, realize a lot of retirements, resignations, incentives, we still had 18 people whose livelihood has been affected by this. There is a breakdown by department and school. I won't go through all of them because this has been a very public presentation, and I also want you to know that this presentation is available on our website, so you can go back and take a look at any of this really in great detail if you'd like. But starting with the central office, we had a reduction of 13.6 in our personnel. That is the largest percentage of all of the areas. Of course, we want to try to make sure that we're reducing where we can that will not affect students as much as possible, but we still have an infrastructure and we still have legal responsibilities that we have to maintain. Blanche James Elementary School had a 4.7% reduction. And just to take you back to our target budget definitions, unlike civil service or unlike the public safety departments, we don't do the least junior person is out first. We can't do that because we have to respond to the needs of our students. So say, for example, our last 5 hires were kindergarten teachers. We can't lose 5 kindergarten sections, just using that as an example. So what we endeavored to do, and what we did as a leadership team, was go through and look at anything that seemed to fit into the strategic or proactive category and reduce that way first, all the way down to reactive. So we can't just take the least senior staff because it might be the one of only 3 in the entire district. We had to look at it from enrollment or student interest in activities, things of that nature. So you're not going to see a straight percentage across every school. I think the biggest question we've received is about class sizes. So you can see here our current class sizes in green, and then the projected class sizes is the second to last column. So we do really work hard to keep our lowest elementary classes the lowest sizes. And we've been able to keep that consistent for quite some time. But as you can see, they are going to increase about 1 to 3 students, depending on the grade level. It has been a goal of ours to keep them as low as possible, to have as most direct contact, as possible with the students. As we go up in grade level, you will see that the increases are a little bit more for that reason. The pink column. If we are to decrease any further, the budget is not complete, if it needs to be reduced any more, or if the state budget doesn't come in favorably, or if we lose any of our grant funding, which is at the federal level is very unpredictable for us right now. It's very hard for us to determine what we may or may not be receiving. One more section reduction in each of those grades is what you see in pink. So that's what would take place. The Richardson Olmsted Elementary School overall had a 10.4% decrease. And for class sizes, instead of 21 to 24, we're going to see 24 to 25 at that level. Again, elementary level, a little bit older students, but still very important grade levels in terms of development and the evolution from learning to read to reading to learn, which is a critical point in a child's development. You can see that should the budget decrease more, even one less section in each of those grades would be up to 27 or more students in a class, which would be very difficult for me and our leadership team to in any way feel comfortable in offering in this district. Easton Middle School had an 11% decrease, and you can see the class sizes here from anywhere from a Spanish class of 16 to 22, 23. We may have classes, foreign language classes, 30, 31. Generally speaking, the classes will be 25, 26. Again, the pink column, that would get quite devastating. And then Oliver Ames High School, this is a little bit more complicated because if you're determining how many kids are in third grade, you just take the number of sections and divide it by the students. High school schedules are far more complicated. And so you can see the class sizes will go from the teens to approximately 25, but the range is anywhere from 22 to 28, and would be more than that for sure if we were to lose any more funding. So in terms of priority restorations, or what would happen if there were an override and what could come back? Well, We can't name positions because of the mercurial nature of our students' needs that I mentioned, but we certainly have priority needs. These are not necessarily in order, but certainly among them, classroom and specialist teachers. Now, you did see some reductions, or if you go back and look at it, you'll see some reductions in art or music. We are not decimating those programs. We consider those core subjects, just like English and math. However, there are some electives, particularly at the high school level, where we offer as many different engaging activities for students as possible. But that might result in a class that has 10 or less students in it. We will not be able to run those any longer. The other reductions are if you reduce 2 or 3 classes at a school, say a 3rd grade level class, for example, then you have less classes of students that need to have art and music and so on. So we're not taking those things away from students. We're just taking away the class section, and so it requires less of the specialist teachers with it. So we're maintaining as much as we can for our students as long as we can, and this reflects that. We would also reinstate electives that we felt were very important for students to explore. The more they are able to engage in high school, the more competitive they can be if they're trying to get into internship programs, colleges, universities, get a job, or be considered for scholarships. We also want them, of course, to explore what it is they want to do when they graduate, and the safest place to do that is when they're in high school. Also, student support staff, that is staff other than classroom teachers, so para, nurse, etc. Student programming, one of the things we had to reduce was the sheep pasture. That has been a decades-long partnership that we would like to try to maintain if we can, or at least a part of it. That is off the table right now, though, except if we are able to benefit from the override, and summer instruction. We do have summer school for special education students, but we have been able to offer a summer school experience for students who we've been able to really stave off what is called summer loss and help students come back to school without having really gone backwards over the summer, and that is going to take a hit this year. Emerging or unexpected needs, ML, are multilingual learners. That population has more than doubled. When I started, we had about 40 or 50 students. Now we have over 130 students who require specialized instruction. We also have to think about, as I said before, the special education, kindergarten, transportation, our data. We lost a data specialist. The mandates from the state and federal government are continuing, and they're actually increasing. And so while we are minimizing staff, we're actually getting more requirements. And facilities. As you'll see on the next chart, you certainly probably can't read this. Again, it's available on our website, but we provide a 5-year capital plan to the town. This is for things other than people. So this would be anything worth $25,000 or more with a useful life of over 5 years. So if we have an RTU unit for air quality on the roof that needs to be replaced for $55,000 or $60,000, we don't typically have that in our operating budget. And now that we are working more reactively, we are very concerned because the next 2 years, you can see that our ask of capital is $250,000 only. And that is just for sustaining the technology, even in the reduced version that we are planning on for next year. The reason for that is because we felt and met with town administration that our schools required a significant security upgrade. And so there is a borrowing that happened at the town side, and our investment as a school department in that was to not have capital requests for 3 years. And so we have 2 more years of that, which means that if we have an unknown facility need, like we all encounter in our houses, for example, we may have a situation that we may not have the funding or may need to resort to turning to the town for that. So one of the things we would do with an override is have a bit there for unanticipated events with our facilities. Important notes about the override. I don't want to mislead anyone that if there is an override, everything is the same as it was this year. We had to reduce by $3 million, and the amount that the school department would get from an override is not $3 million, so fully transparent about that. Most of the reduced or eliminated positions were not actual RIFs or reduction in force notices, like I said before. We also are going to have many positions that will remain unfilled because they are maybe those smaller size elective courses that we just aren't in a position to offer anymore. That is a proactive stance to have depth and breadth of offerings, and we just are not in a financial position for that. So there may be things that won't come back for that reason. But also, we're going to have to be very mindful when you're running on a lean budget and you don't have financial buffers, if you will, in there, then we have to really stay on top of all of the things that present themselves as reactive and needing an immediate attention from us. And so that will affect final budget allocations as well. So finally, our non-override budget request for the town is 3.6%. But if we were to bring back some of those priority items from the prior slide, it would be a 7.5% budget or $2,060,000. And I do realize that we are not in 2005. That is a regrettable error. The school committee did vote on the non-override budget of 3.6% at their April 17th, 2025 meeting, and their override budget, unlike the other departments in town, just the override budget is to be voted on this evening by the school committee, April 29th, 2025. For further information, we have all of this and more on the Easton Public Schools website under the business office page, the Town of Easton, and the PACE website. There's also a town override page, as you know. However, if you go to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, you can find just about every other possible form of documentation, not just on the Easton Public Schools, but in comparison with other towns and districts. It is a lot to navigate, so if there's ever anything that you're looking for specifically, we may be able to point you in the direction a lot more quickly, so please just reach out to our offices. We'd be very happy to help you with that. And I will turn it back to Town Administrator Reed at this point.
I will close this out quickly. There's only a handful of slides here because we have not yet talked about the override and its impact on you as taxpayers. So the override budget is informed by the recommendations of promoting a sustainable Easton, which was created by an overwhelming vote of our residents at town meeting last year, who tasked the committee to review our operations and finances and make recommendations to you on actions needed to sustain quality services in Easton. The committee of 19 included Easton residents, educators, first responders, town and school leadership, and spent months diving into every aspect of our finances, holding open houses and listening sessions to inform their recommendation for a $7.3 million override coupled with a community compact on policy priorities and changes to make the override last as long as we can should voters be willing to consider it. Respecting that any ask is a real impact on our taxpayers. That recommended override of $7.3 million is estimated to add about $800 per year to the median homeowner's tax bill, or $200 per quarter. Everyone's individual impact from any kind of override or tax decision varies with the value of their home, and so we do have a tax calculator for residents to use at easton.ma.us/override. Consistent with the PACE compact, the override will eliminate the use of $3.3 million in reserves in the fiscal 26 budget, which will ensure a stable financial position and prevent future cuts in fiscal year 27. This will improve the multi-year stability of the town and school operating budgets. It will increase the availability of cash capital capacity to fund school technology, roads, emergency response equipment, and other capital needs to benefit the community. And critically, if we don't eliminate the use of reserves in the override budget, we are setting the community up for a fiscal cliff 12 months away even if the override passes, guaranteeing millions in cuts, which is unacceptable and not an appropriate approach to an override. As presented by the superintendent, a portion of the override would be restoration to the cuts made to the Easton Public School budget. Not going to read this whole slide. Each department here for the town side has addressed the particulars. That adds up to a $727,000 restoration, which would be about 89 cents of every dollar that we've cut. Although general government will still keep nearly 50,000 in cuts, even if the override were to pass, in order to prioritize public safety, public works, and health and community services. For the town side, that'll yield an increase of 5% over our current year in the override scenario, compared to 1.6% without it. There's no denying that an override poses a major impact, especially to those living on fixed incomes. And that's something front of mind for the select board, promoting a sustainable Easton. It came up at almost every public info session and open house. And so that's why, consistent with the PACE Compact, we're recommending a 30% increase to the requested overlay budget, which will allow increases to tax abatements and exemptions for seniors, veterans, and individuals with disabilities in Easton. This funding, along with the necessary votes to effectuate it on your town meeting warrant, will potentially double the tax breaks on most existing exemptions and index veterans exemptions to inflation on a go-forward basis, so that as the cost of living grows, those who have served in this community and are qualified for these exemptions don't lose ground on those. This funding would bring Easton's expected financial assistance to seniors, veterans, and individuals with disabilities next year to between $900,000 and $1 million. There is a $75,000 restoration to cuts in the insurance budget, which would increase the allowance available for position restorations on the town and school side. This is an estimate at this point necessarily, as even if the override does pass on May 19th and June 10th, it will take time, as the chiefs and the superintendent have spoken to advertise hire on board, and not all staff take insurance. We're also recommending just over $200,000 of that override, $7.3 million, be allocated for recurring capital spending. In an ideal situation, unspent operating funds at the end of the year, excess revenues above what you forecast, that's called free cash. That would be primarily funding your capital needs, things that you know we need: police cruisers, road repairs, school technology. Easton has been relying on those funds in the operating budget, and that has decreased our ability to fund recurring capital. It's a discussion that comes up in this room regularly. And so not only would the override budget eliminate the use of that money in operations and thereby increase its availability for capital, this would afford another $200,000, at least in the first year, to be allocated towards recurring capital. There's a particular strategy here that we are working with functionally a draft of the state's budget. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts does not usually have their budget set before we need to vote ours. The House has their version, the Senate has theirs, and it goes through reconciliation. So we're working with the current House version of a budget. Sometimes that changes. By prioritizing this $200,000 for recurring capital spend, which wouldn't even be allocated till the fall, in the event that we get a surprise we don't like over the summer and the final state budget doesn't fund Chapter 70 education or government aid at the levels that they're currently drafting, this gives us the ability to reduce our budgets without immediately resorting to reducing positions. If, on the other hand, the state budget remains as its current proposal or it improves, that will create excess capacity in the future for recurring services in the community. Final recommendation is the creation of an override stabilization fund. PACE extensively documented that even if this override passes, and this comes up when people ask why is the number 7.3 versus 4 versus 8 or 12, this was a consensus figure of that 19-member committee. We recognize that it is not enough to fully restore all the cuts made to town and school budgets, and that we will need to work very hard, even if the override passes, to maintain stable services going into the future, particularly if certain cost pressures we're feeling continue and the trends they're on. So we're recommending that $800,000 the override fund the creation of a new specific override reserve stabilization fund for purposes of offsetting future wages and insurances, which, as we've discussed tonight, are the largest cost drivers in our budget. These dollars would come out of the $7.3 million. It's not a supplemental. It's not an end run to make $7.3 million into $8.1. They don't add to that override. And it would go into that override stabilization reserve fund and could only be appropriated out to town or school departments with voters approving it at town meeting. That would allow us to stretch the override as long as possible. And so I'm going to end tonight talking about the benefit of stretching an override as long as possible by looking at our history as a community since Prop 2.5 went into effect 43 years ago. As I mentioned at the outset tonight, the funding system that we're using can make it feel like we're pit against one another. Communities are most challenged to continue sustaining services that we all rely on without an override when inflation is high, and that is also the worst time for us to ask you to pay an increased tax bill. Easton has always been a lean operation. There have been 2 overrides passed in Easton, one in 1990 and one in 2006. The desire to avoid unnecessary overrides or superfluous tax increases is 100% reasonable and something that I think that everyone here can agree on, no matter where you stand on the alternative budget choices. And it's something that our record demonstrates Easton takes seriously, because since 2006, we've completed the longest run without an operating override in Easton's history since Prop 2.5 went into effect in the early 1980s. Easton has sought half as many overrides and debt exclusions since it did before 2006, and it has spread those requests out more than it once did, where before 2006, 11 of those override and debt exclusion requests occurred within a single year of one another. There's a comparison on screen. Again, it's available online. We have hard copies available in our public buildings, showing the different increases in the blue budget, which is non-override, as well as the orange budget, which is the override. The town meeting warrant everyone will have when voting May 19th has an article that cleanly lays out, here's the non-override budget, here's the increases in the override, and here's that total amount. As we head into the final stretch of town meeting on May 19th, I'd like to remind those with us tonight who haven't yet reviewed some of these documents. They are all available to you. If you haven't yet, please sign up for our weekly e-newsletter at easton.ma.us/towncrier. You can visit our dedicated budget pages, and again, hard copies of key Promoting a Sustainable Easton documents and town meeting warrants will be available in the Ames Free Library, Frothingham Hall, and town offices. These are the final dates ahead of you. Next Wednesday, May 7th, PACE will hold its 3rd and final open house. It will be a great opportunity to learn and engage. And then, as with every budget this community has ever adopted, voters of Easton will be the final deciders on May 19th, and then again at the special override election on June 10th. We've launched a dedicated override information page where you could review dates, review all of our budgets, override-related information. It is not an advocacy page. It is not for us to tell you, you must vote yes or no. It lays the facts out for you so that hopefully you feel comfortable making what you think is the right choice for yourself and for your family on May 19th and June 10th, because it is your choice. I really appreciate those of you who stuck it out. I know this was long intentionally so that we're not up here for 2 hours at town meeting. I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss Easton's budget with you, and thank you for your engagement. I'm going to turn it over to the chair of the select board to invite public comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Connor, and thank you to everyone who did a presentation tonight. There's a lot of information to try to get out quickly, and we appreciate you staying for that. Normally, we have the boards ask questions first, but we really want to hear from the public. So what we'll ask you to do is if you have a question or comment, go up to one of the 2 microphones, and I'll recognize you. We'll ask you to give your name and your address for minutes. If you have mobility issues and it's hard for you to get to the microphones, just raise your hand and I'll ask somebody to bring a microphone to you. So with that, who wants to ask the first question or make the first comment?
Ken Percy, 13 Miller Road. 2 questions. Stonehill College bought back Moreau Hall. What happened to the money that you got from that?
So as I mentioned before, that for a public hearing, you can ask your question or make a comment. We're going to hear them all, and then we'll address some of them at the end. So we're not going to do a back and forth like we would normally do at a meeting. So I'll take note of your Stonehill question.
Okay, the other question is, is the board doing, or the school committee, as far as getting the state to give us better ideas of what we're going to get from them? Are they putting any pressure on the governor to get more money for the towns instead of giving it all to illegals?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you say your name and address? Did you get that, Elizabeth? Okay, thank you. Next, go ahead.
Hi, Michael Owens, 10 Linden Street. First off, I want to thank the town administration and all the committees that are up here for all the work you guys have done, putting together and evaluating the town's expenses and coming up with an admirable way forward. regardless of whether the override passes or does not. That being said, as a parent and a small business owner in town, I can't imagine an Easton where we are actively choosing to cut vital services like fire, EMS, police, DPW, or choosing to cut resources to our schools, our parks and rec, and other town departments. I've only been a resident here for the last 4 years, but I'm very proud to live here. When we were choosing to move to Massachusetts, I did a lot of research about all of the different towns in the area. I'm a spreadsheet nerd, and I put together all of the info about the town that I could on hundreds of towns in Massachusetts and New Hampshire and Connecticut. And Easton ranked highest average across most of the facets that we were most interested in. Things like access to really good schools, safety, good cost of living. All of the property values looked like they were going to be going up, and lo and behold, they did. If we cut what we're discussing cutting here today with the non-override budget, our kids are going to suffer. We are going to suffer. This is going to be a negative, net negative for our town that will snowball because, as they've said earlier today, the cuts this year are going to get worse next year if we do not have an override. And frankly, this is why a local group of townspeople like myself have come together to get the vote out. The most important thing here today that I wanted to say to everyone here is come vote. We did not have a great turnout for our last election. We did not have a great turnout for our last town meeting. We have a very small number of people who come out to vote, arguably. And coming out to say yes to this override is going to be crucial for our town's success and moving forward. If you are interested in any sort of support for the override and figuring out what we're going to do next after, please come see me after, or visit soseaston.com. or email me at saveourschoolseaston@gmail.com. Ultimately, we need people to vote, and we need people to vote yes for this override. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, do we have any questions in the Q&A? I also do want to mention, is Jamie still on there? Select person Jamie Stebbins is traveling for business, but he is on the Zoom, so we can see that he's participating remotely. Sure. So we'll have Connor answer a couple of those questions that you asked, and then we're gonna open it up for questions from the board briefly. Then we're gonna deliberate, and we'll be voting whether to recommend the regular budget or the override budget. And then we will wrap it up.
Thank you, Dottie. So the question as far as where did the sales proceeds of Moreau Hall go? When we sell public property, we need town meeting to sign off on it. We came to town meeting a couple years ago, got that permission to sell Moreau Hall. We have to put it out to a bid process. So Stonehill bid, they did purchase it for $2.3 million. And what we did with that purchase and sale agreement is that there is a escrow account where funds are being drawn down slowly in the first, I believe, 2 years. I think this is online, but I'll follow up with you directly with the exact timeline. But funds are drawn down in the first couple of years from that purchase price. And there is a clawback provision baked in to protect the public interest that if Stonehill, or in the case of anyone who bid on it, what the town said is we want to see this redeveloped in a certain way. We understand there's upfront costs for design and construction to do so. You have a couple of years to get that together once you know we'll do a contingent sale to you. And in the interim, we're going to be drawing, I think the number is $36,000 per month approximately from that escrow fund. And if you do not deliver by date certain as far as plans for preservation of the exterior and renovation, then the public takes that building back and we keep what you have paid. So right now those funds are being paid gradually, and then at that performance period. They need to put plans forward and get to work. They are planning on renovating it, using it as part of their campus. It'll be publicly facing, which is great. I think archival, museum space, some conference space that the public would also have some access to. So they are working on that. And as far as what the funds could be used for, it's great to have those sales proceeds, but it's one-time money. And so that's not something that we would typically program for recurring operating spend for something like the schools, police, or fire, but it can certainly help us bolster our capital funding programs. You could use the proceeds from that sale to fund other needs, whether that's roads or building repairs. And again, only voters of Easton could sign off on that. As far as our efforts advocating with the state, I'll touch on it a bit, and I'd ask Dr. Cabral to as well. That's a great question, and it's one I'm glad you asked. One of the important parts of our job is not to kind of look at the budget and say, well, there's red there, let's go ask for an override, everyone. It's to try and figure out, not only on the expense side, what we could do to cut, that we talked a bit about tonight, but how can we advocate for Easton on the state level to try to get the best funding position that we can. Myself, Dr. Cabral, members of the select board are routinely at Beacon Hill advocating for Easton. We are on, again, myself and many up here are on statewide policy boards with the Massachusetts Municipal Association and Massachusetts Superintendents Association, who are, for lack of a better word, lobbying branches to support city and town services. And we hold roles on those boards to not only advocate for this industry, so to speak, but to amplify Easton's perspective, because we have some unique factors here I touched on earlier tonight. Unique factors that make Easton a great place to live, but that really kind of just fundamentally challenge our public income and expense. And so we are routinely advocating for the community. We have not seen it. We are now finally starting to see the minimum aid funding ticking up from that $30 per pupil. That's something Easton's been contending with for a very long time. There's a lot more attention on that now, which is good. The problem is there's a lot more attention on it because of the problem. The house is on fire and 77% of schools are now in minimum funding status. So there's improvements happening there, and we are grateful for them, but to go from $30 per pupil to maybe $100 or even $150, which is a proposal right now, would have made all the difference in the world had that been the baseline for years and years and years. And so we're playing catch up with just compounded millions and millions of lost opportunity there. So we are fighting for Easton every day with the state, trying to make sure that you're getting your fair share, whether that's with earmarks for capital funding, things like funding for PFAS plants. But it's a tough fight. I guess I would talk to Dr. Cabral, please, to weigh in on the school's perspective, but I know we have all been lobbying for all of you.
Thank you. Yes, from the school's perspective, we have our professional organizations, Mass Association of School Superintendents, and also Mass Association of School Committees that have legislative agents that we work with. We have an extremely engaged school committee that has attended many meetings with me with our legislative delegation. So we are working on several items right now that we believe will make a big difference for us. We've been working on them for about a decade. We are providing testimony regularly. Connor Reed and I submit written documentation every year. And we're also at the State House meeting with our legislators. We are working to increase minimum aid. We are also working to increase the circuit breaker, which is special education reimbursement, also reimbursement for transportation for special education. We are working on, we met with the Commissioner of Education to try to have the Department of Education work on their requirements for entitlement grants. Easton, because of the makeup of Easton, we are automatically disqualified for many of the entitlement grants at the state level, so we're working hard to secure, and we have secured a lot of money in competitive grants. Unfortunately, again, we are absorbing a lot of responsibilities in central administration right now, and so that will only cut how much we can work on competitive grants. We don't have a grant writer. We also are working on changing the wage adjustment factor in Easton. We are not in the Boston labor market like many of our neighbors are. That actually hurts us in our formula for funding. We are not recipients of the SOA, which is the Student Opportunity Act. Only foundation districts get that. We did work very hard with the late Representative Carol Doherty, who put forward a bill on our behalf to have, just this past year, to have the foundation formula studied in depth by the legislature, because it's pretty broadly acknowledged that it is a broken foundation, a broken formula, excuse me. It's a very complicated formula, but it is the formula that keeps us minimum aid instead of foundation formula, which would qualify us for things like the SOA funding, which is multi-million dollars every year. That was not successful. She was prepared to file that for us again. We're working with our new delegation to try to move that forward. Also, Senator Walter Timilty did put forward an amendment for us for changing our wage adjustment factor. That also wasn't successful. We have a new senator as well that we're going to work with to try to get that moved forward. And we also, excuse me, in terms of working with our state delegation, we are also doing the same with at the federal level. We're providing testimony, working with our national organizations, certainly to try to make sure that we keep our federal grants, which amount to about $1.3 million in Easton. So that would be a huge, huge impact on our budget if we were to lose that funding. And of course, we always work closely with the town administration on funding, whether it is through the Community Preservation Act, whether it is through capital budgeting, whether it is through leveraging revolving accounts. We've tried to honestly exhaust every single possibility, and we will continue doing that for the benefit of the taxpayers of Easton. They have been very generous to the school department, and we are extremely grateful for that, and we will always be very responsible with every dollar, every dime that we receive, and we will try to maximize that as much as we can at every level of government, and including private industry and securing competitive grants and things that we can do on a cost-neutral basis. We've actually instituted a lot of things in our district in partnership with colleges and universities and community partners and different groups to make them very low cost or cost neutral for the district. We're also working on some revenue generation in terms of offering spots in special education or even spaces in our buildings. So we're always looking for ideas. If anybody has any others to share with us, we will definitely pursue all of them. But those are some of the things that we've been going after.
For the three committees that are here, everyone has a town meeting warrant printed in front of you among your other documents. Anyone at home, this is available to you as well at easton.ma.us/townmeeting. We have it in town hall. So as far as the votes, the deliberation questions the boards may have for staff, they will be ultimately related to everything we presented tonight, which are contained in Articles 1, 2A, and 2B in your warrant. And so we just had an election. Congratulations to folks who stood for election and were elected by your neighbors to lead the community. The warrant for town meeting is the official agenda of action for our voters, and the policy boards represented here tonight take positions recommending or not certain articles. Your votes tonight don't effectuate any of this. You can't vote to pass an override here. But it's important information for the public to understand where their elected officials stand on the items that are going to be in front of them. And so everyone has that warrant. It's Articles 1, which is the non-override budget, balanced through cuts and reserves, and then Articles 2A and 2B, which create that override stabilization account, and 2B showing where the funding would go from that $7.3 million override. And Dottie, I'll turn it over to you to lead the boards as far as any questions or follow-up and deliberation on those articles.
Great. So we've seen this information. We've been working on it all collectively for many, many months. So you may not see a tremendous amount of questions from us, but I'm going to start with each board and ask if there's comments or questions, starting with the select board. Any comments or questions?
So as Darty said, we've seen a lot of this, and I think there's no question that hasn't been asked over the past several months or years. But that being said, I wanted to hone in again on the reliance on mutual aid point, just because folks may not have heard the discussion last night. And, it didn't quite hone in for me until you showed the statistic about the increasing rate of use of mutual aid. And something I've heard a lot in the community is folks say, oh, we can just rely on Stoughton and Brockton or Norton, whomever, to come help out in need. But the thing is that I assume that we're seeing the same statistics of need from those other neighboring communities where their rate of asking for support is also going up. And when they ask for help, we're one of those communities they ask for help. Is that accurate? Like, are we seeing the same increases from our neighbors? And kind of what point does that system just become unsustainable? I mean, it already is unsustainable to consider that as part of our budget plan, but...
Absolutely. So mutual aid is a backstop for unusual situations. It's not designed to be something that you build a response model around, saying, oh, Easton has 10 runs a day or 15 runs a day, and we'll just build in the fact that Stoughton or West Bridgewater are going to take 4 or 5 of them every single day. That's not what it's designed. It's designed for that unusual situation where you get 3, 4, or 5 calls at the same time, where the system's not built out for that. And all the other towns around us do the same thing. And when a town's mutual aid demand, where they're bringing it in, increases and increases, is beholden on that community to address that situation, because you're becoming reliant on mutual aid to help you. And what ends up happening is you're taking their ability to protect their residents away. Because when they come to Easton, they can't protect, if it's Stoughton, they're less able to protect Stoughton, and now maybe Canton or Sharon has to come there, and it snowballs. But in the unusual situations, like a structure fire or multiple calls at the same time, that's what it's meant to be for, and it works very well. Mutual aid across the country in the fire service is an unbelievable system where we're all trained similarly. We can work, I could go to California right now and function pretty well, because that's how we all trained across this country. But you can't build a system around that. And I think that's the point. When we start seeing our mutual aid go up, which we're already seeing a trend up without the cuts. When I talked earlier about our minimum staffing of 8, without an override, we're not going to be able to sustain that indefinitely, and you're going to see that minimum shift level drop to 7, which jeopardizes the second ambulance. When the second ambulance goes down, when the overtime money runs out, and we have to drop that second ambulance just to keep the fire trucks up. And remember, the fire trucks can provide medical aid, they can provide fire, they can provide hazmat, rescue. That's why we utilize them as our primary response vehicle. The ambulance can only provide medical. So you're always going to get somebody who can do a little bit of everything with a fire engine, which is why we can't take them out of service. We have to keep them up, because it at least guarantees you some help. The ambulance can come from somewhere else if we need it. But when we down that second ambulance, our staffing is now at 7 when we do that. And that's 2012 levels. And that means we're relying every day, if we have, let's say, 15 runs in a day, which is not uncommon, if 6 of those go to that second ambulance now gone, that means every day 6 ambulances are coming from our surrounding towns every day that we have to run at 7. That's not sustainable for us or the community, never mind the revenue loss from the ambulance. So I appreciate the question on mutual aid. It's a devastating thing to us. It hurts our revenue, it hurts our staffing, it hurts our neighbors, and we will have to default to it in a scenario where the budget is cut. At some point in the year, it will happen, because our ability to keep that second ambulance up is overtime contingent, and if it runs out and the town doesn't have any other revenue to give us, we don't have any option, and that's where we'll be, and it's not a place we should be.
Thank you, Chief Alexander. I had one other thing that feels like a question, but it's sort of a point. So I'm just going to say it now, even though we have time for deliberation, because it really ties into what we heard tonight from each department head. And I appreciate every single leader who got up here and said, you know, things are going to be really difficult, and we'll continue to do our job to the best of our ability, and we'll continue to serve this community and deliver excellent service. And I believe that, and I appreciate that, but I really, really worry about burnout. I worry about talent drain, and I worry later about our ability to attract talent back to the community. And I don't know what question in there other than to the leadership of this town to just, we're going to have to be really mindful about what that future looks like and take that into account as well, because that scares me. So that's all I have to say for now.
I think it's very important to reiterate what Connor said regards to our acknowledgement that an override will be effective, and it will be a negative effect to some members of our community. And we're very much aware of that. We've been aware of that for a number of years. We've used ARPA money to staff the Taxation Aid Committee to help people whose income, whether it was fixed income or just low income, to be able to pay their taxes, to be able to stay in this town, which we all love. I want to acknowledge that Tom Broussard and Mark Lamb were the ones who came up with those ideas a number of years ago, and thank Connor Reed for utilizing ARPA money. I don't know of any other town that did that, but we are very keenly aware of the impact that this override will have on certain members of our community, which is why we went for the Taxation Aid Committee, why we do the circuit breaker that Senator Timilty helped get through the legislature for us, and that, as Connor said, we're looking at somewhere around $900,000 or to $1 million of aid to our citizens in this community. And I think it's very important to know that we care about that. We are taxpayers, we are residents of this community, so we know the impact, and we are very cognizant of developing plans and processes to help our citizens out, not only by keeping quality education or police, fire, DPW, but also to be aware that people need help in paying their taxes. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. I'm going to turn it over to you, Jamie, and you can, I can't see this far down the table, so you'll be able to see your people, and we'll get their comments, questions. What did I say? Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot who you are. Patrick.
Jamie Patrick Helen here. I have one question. I want to see if anybody else on my committee has a question before I take the mic completely. Arthur?
My first time in a meeting, so I guess I don't know how the mic works. My question, I think, is maybe rhetorical kind of in nature, but I want to direct it to, I think, Connor, but I think more so as a general kind of discussion item, and it's something that I raised with you back in February at the open house. I think what my concern is right now is that I think echo, I think what's been said a lot, this is going to be, I think, a pretty big ask for a lot of people in our community. And what I'm concerned about is what next steps are. Because, bluntly, what led us to this point, I think, Connor, you mentioned, is inflationary concerns that are a nationwide problem. It's a Eastern Massachusetts problem. It's everywhere. So I think one thing I want to pose to you, Connor, but I think also just have a general discussion about is what's our next step, and how are we going to insulate ourselves from this in the future, so we're in a position where we're not coming back in this position again, because, candidly, I don't think it's necessarily fair to our town employees. It's not fair to our departments. So I think it's something we need to talk about.
Sure. Thank you, Arthur. So there's a lot there, and I'm glad you brought it up because these are important points. So I think the first thing I would point to is our current track record, right? Which I'm not here to say is perfect, but it is the longest run in the history of Prop 2.5 this community has ever gone without an override. So we agree with you, and we want to keep it that way. We can't take that for granted, though, and I can't tell you and voters, trust me, it's all set. So that's why promoting a sustainable Easton, part of their discussion around an override was exactly to your question, Arthur, which is what will these boards, all three of these boards up here, as the kind of chief policy boards of the community, commit to the voters as a compact that if voters are willing to take that big step and consider a tax increase, which is painful in this current economy. What will we do to try to maximize the benefit there? And I touched a little bit on that in some of the remarks. I do think it's important that, we do have, from promoting a sustainable Easton, that community compact, which is, I'm not going to go into every single detail, but a few of them. First and foremost, if the override passes, is no request for a debt exclusion for 5 years, no operating override for at least 4. That doesn't mean year 5 we're going to be here right away, but makes clear that, because there are some communities right now who have had overrides fairly recently, some who've passed numerous in the past 10 years who are still kind of going back to the well, that I don't think represents the expectation of a culture in Easton generally, and it's certainly not something we want to be doing. I'll speak for town administration, but I know the select board echoes that. Frankly, all 3 of these committees do, because they all adopted this compact. We have to focus on growth, and that's a hard conversation. I had my little Venn diagram up there earlier tonight, and Easton is a beautiful place, but a lot of our challenges, not just the inflationary challenges of the macro economy, but our kind of policy posture, they're not going to go away if an override passes, right? And so I think it's important, again, to look at what have we done and how can we do better. And so we, as a community, had no sewer, 0, until roughly a decade ago. And those were not easy projects. Those were not easy debates held in this room. And the board and the finance committee and voters of Easton repeatedly supported those, so we built those 3. All 3 of those, and I mentioned this in the budget book, but I know not everyone wants to necessarily read 170 pages. All 3 of those were made possible by working collaboratively with housing developers, which again can sometimes be a touchy political subject. But the reality is, and if you talk to chambers of commerce, you talk to small business owners, you talk to economists, there is a cost of living crisis that's particularly acute in Massachusetts because there is just simply not enough housing. There's not enough types of housing. And that hits everyone, whether you're a young professional looking to start a family, getting priced out of a market, whether it's from astronomical value increases, which if you were already in the market and you have that equity, that could be good. But if you're trying to get in and mortgage rates have gone up 2 or 3 times, you're priced out. Or if you're a couple who maybe you lived in a larger home with your children, they went to schools, they got a great education here, they've moved somewhere, maybe they're working in a city, and perhaps you don't feel that the house you're in now fits your needs as you're aging in place, but there's nowhere for you to go because there's not enough denser or smaller housing. That is a major problem throughout the state, and it's a challenge here in Easton. And so the board took a much more pro-housing stance in the past 10 years, again, not without controversy, where our housing inventory increased from 8,000 to 9,000 units in 10 years. That's a lot. So when there's voters here who say, wow, a lot of things have changed, they're not wrong, right? That's a 13% increase in housing in 10 years, which is far more than most suburbs in Massachusetts are working to do. That did not usher in the end of our quality services. It actually helped promote and sustain it. Had the town and voters who've elected these officials not worked collaboratively to not just say yes to every single project everywhere, not to lower standards and have no zoning, but had we not done that work collaboratively with Avalon, with Beacon for Shovelworks, with Doug King for Vaquisa 40R, not only would we not have diversified our housing stock and added those rental and condo units that folks rely on and are an important part of our kind of portfolio as a community, we never would have made it 19 years without override. And I feel extremely comfortable, having worked here for 14 of those years, to take that stance. That all of those large infrastructure projects, we relied on funding from those developers along with state funding and competitive grants that we advocated for to reduce, although not eliminate, the substantial cost to the betterment payers in those districts. And that has catalyzed the best new growth, which is from a kind of wonky perspective, that means new development, whether housing, commercial, et cetera, that's subject to taxation, the best growth we've ever had as a community. And that's been kind of lost in the fray because the inflationary pressure is hitting us like a truck at the same time. But we were averaging, before those sewer districts, before those housing developments, 400,000, 500,000, 600,000 a year of new tax revenue from growth. That went up to nearly $1 million as Avalon was coming online, took a hit when pandemic hit us, and that was up to $1.5 million last year. This doesn't mean we need to deregulate everything and, again, just like have everyone building everywhere. But Pace heard repeatedly, one of the most common questions that we were asked was, well, why isn't it just easier to build? Because again, a lot of those things are two sides of the same coin, where we like the green space, we like the open space, we like the historic preservation, but those things by design make it harder to build. And we had none of that infrastructure until 10 years ago. So that was a really long answer. And I said I would be short, so I failed, I apologize. But that's why the PACE committee and the compact emphasize that we need to continue not to do it recklessly, but to be smart and recognize that we can't go to the public and say, if we do this one override this one time, we will never have to consider this hard discussion again. And to say that if we want to extend the benefit of that, assuming sustaining a comparable level of services, there needs to be growth, right? So that's a part of that compact. Expanding financial relief that we've talked about, that's really important. Part of it too is self-imposed budget caps, right? So the town and the schools through the select board of the school committee have agreed that should voters entrust us with this big ask, that we would self-impose 4% caps on operating budgets on a go forward. That's complicated because that means there's going to be some years, maybe a couple years in, where we're not able to necessarily sustain every single thing that we're doing. But we can't not lay out what we're going to try to do for the public. So I think continuing to try to be strategic about growth. We executed this winter an intermunicipal agreement with the city of Brockton. That's something that Easton has been looking to do for more than 20 years, to make sewer treatment available to the industrial park. That will be an enormous return on investment. But that's going to take years to come online and pay those dividends. And in the interim, we'll have to continue running tight operating budgets, being thoughtful about growth without trading the character of what makes Easton special, and simply just agreeing that if this passes, we will not be back for a minimum of those 4 or 5 years. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Connor. And I appreciate the answer. I think that my biggest concern is, I'm a former state employee. And the reason why I'm a former state employee and not a current state employee is if I kept my state job, I wouldn't be able to afford my house. And as a 30-year-old, and I know a lot of people in my age group are facing this right now, there's a real cost of living concern here. So, and I fear that we need to have a plan moving forward. This can't be the end of the discussion. One way or another, the voters are going to vote one way or another on the override, but we can't let this be the end, because there's a whole group of people in Eastern Massachusetts. We're producing some of the best scholars and best, doctors, lawyers in Boston and around Eastern Massachusetts, and they can't stay here because they can't afford to stay here. So this needs to be, I think, a longer discussion than. And the reason I'm bringing this up is just we're at a kind of an important juncture right now, and I think everybody here acknowledges that. So I think that's just something I want to raise for everybody here.
I just want to make a comment on that too, just to clarify that over the years, I've been on the board 12 years now. We do these things every year, but every year there's not a crisis that people see and hear from it. So we are committed to continuing that. We've been looking for ways to save money, increase efficiencies, and every year, if people really wanted to know what we did, you could go back to the budget memos every year or online. So I know that I can speak for the whole select board that we agree with you, and we're committed to doing that. The finance committee and school committee do as well. So that's a really great point.
Anybody else from the Finance Committee side? The only question I have is about Article 2A, just a clarification, which is the wording of it makes it seem like the $800,000 that's going into the override reserve stabilization fund for future town and school wages and insurance. Is that going to stay separate? Is that a separate override funding option? I unfortunately was not able to watch the last select board meeting yet. I just want to make sure I put a point on that. Yes, it is. So communities can maintain general stabilization funds, which we do in Easton, for just general purpose reserves. They could also maintain specialized stabilization funds, which has a few benefits, but I think mostly the benefit is for the public to understand what the priority of those funds are. So we have a capital stabilization account, a sewer stabilization account. And so in this case, again, based on the feedback that we heard collectively from the members of PACE and from the community, and again, you just heard from Arthur, there's a real sensitivity that even if this passes, we have our work cut out for us. And we know what the budget drivers on the expense side are. And so we wanted to signal to voters that, again, this isn't kind of have an override and take our word for it. We're going to intentionally not allocate out every single dollar of that increased spending capacity, although the schools or the town departments could all make compelling arguments why we ought to, because we know we're going to be up against it. And so this would take it and put it in that dedicated account. It's accounted for separately on the finance plan. People can see where it is, and it can't go to a department without us explaining to voters why we're asking. So it is separate. Thank you, sir. I think that's it for the Finance Committee.
So I'll pass it down to the school committee. Can't see you at this really long table, but if the school committee wants to ask their questions, Lauren.
So the school committee has had very in-depth conversations on the budget already, but we do have 2 new members, so I wanted to give you the opportunity to ask questions if you have any, as well as Jackie and Kelly, if you guys do as well. No? Yes? Okay.
Connor, you did kind of touch on that, and Patrick, you kind of asked my question. Can you go through the benefits of having a separate stabilization fund for that $800,000 rather than putting it into the general stabilization fund? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's your job now. Congratulations. So that's a good question. And again, I think the benefit is we wanted to be specific of our intentions with the voters on what, and not only our voters, but our workforce, right? This is a tough budget year for the community, and it's been challenging for our workforce as well. And so the point of the specialized account is to signal this is what this is specifically for. If that were to go in the general stabilization fund, from a financial perspective, that's still fine, but it would get added to the existing balance. Assuming the override passes, the balance would be maintained at $7 million, which is where it is. So it would kind of get lost in there. I don't want to, that sounds really bad to say. It's accounted for every year. You can see it on the finance plans. But again, the intention there is really to recognize what we know those pressures are, and also to recognize that when PACE was doing their job, we have an accounting-based budget deficit, right? Which if you go and read our budget books, you could see we started at $6.36 million. That was already contemplating the use of some free cash reserves. So the real kind of accounting-based deficit for next year that we were forecasting was about $7.5 million. PACE was not just tasked with what do we need to fix just this year, again, to kind of Arthur's point and a lot of other folks, how do we posture ourselves more sustainably? And so the members of PACE gave the opinion that the size of the financial challenge, so to speak, is $8.1 million. They did not recommend that we go for an $8.1 million override, and instead said, you know, the town and school leaders need to find $800,000 of efficiencies outside of the revenue side. And so I felt that the cleanest way to implement that and make it real was to say, okay, here's the override recommendation. PACE said, get creative and find $800,000 that's not spending. And so my solution there, outside of we're not restoring all the cuts in the override, is this is $800,000 that's just not getting spent in the first place. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes, and I do have one more question for Dr. Cabral. For the one-to-one program for K through 8, is that being canceled regardless of the override, whether the override goes through or not, or will that be restored if the override goes through?
Thank you for that question. It is not among our priority restorations right now because that's more of a long-term procurement plan that needs to be in place, and it's very uncertain what the long-term plan is going to be. So if we commit to maintaining that, then we have to commit to a procurement plan of a cycle of years, and so that is not on our priority list right now. And it's K to 7, yep.
Okay, thank you. Colleen, you don't have anything? No? Okay, Jackie, all set. Kelly?
I've asked plenty of questions at other sessions.
All right, we're good. Okay, we're all set. Thank you.
Arthur, you look like you had another question. We're going to be super nice to you tonight because it's your first night.
I know, I'm sorry. This is way out of procedure. This is actually just a question for police. And this is just the former public defender in me, just curious. During your presentation, I heard you mention that y'all haven't had a court officer since 2015. I'm assuming you're mentioning that's the liaison between the department and the district attorney's office to coordinate discovery. If the override were to pass, is there a plan to kind of re-implement sort of somebody who's dedicated to that?
Correct.
I know what a court officer does, but can you explain it to the people who may not know as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's changed a lot probably in the last month with discovery and some rule changes that came from the Supreme Court. So our court liaison really is the in-between for all police-related criminal applications or any arrests that are made, helping with the prosecution of any case. So right now it's split. Our detective sergeant is doing it on top of supervising the detectives. Back when we started peeling the layers of the onion back, so to speak, during COVID, we had to do that. And as we lost an officer a few years ago due to a retirement, we just could never get back to separating that. 10 years ago, it was a dedicated supervisor. So the goal is to shift that back to a dedicated person. You can't, as you know, you can't have the officer of the day just show up to court and do these things. There's so much going on with that position. With the discovery requests, it's exacerbated the problem. We're getting them daily. They're time sensitive. We need to get them turned around within 10 days. That's all witness statements, victim statements, police reports, body-worn camera footage, anything and everything, and has to be done timely. So it's a lot of stress on the detectives now, and dropping one, it's still going to fall under their purview, which leads myself, the deputy chief, our records clerk, spending time watching body camera footage and getting it out. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other questions, I just want to make one comment, and I appreciate all the thoughtful questions, not just tonight, but as we've gone through this whole process and the input from the public. We will continue to take comments and questions through email, reach out if somebody wants to talk to us. Next week, meet us at PACE next Wednesday night. There's still a lot of opportunities before we get to town meeting and to the vote. Last night at our select board meeting, we talked about the tax calculator online. And what I've seen is there's some conversation about how to use that. It's not that you go back to the Blanche Ames School, get that number, go to the DPW, police and fire, get that number, and then go to the override and get that number and add them all up together. It's not that kind of a math equation. You already have some of the tax impact in your bills already from the Blanche Ames that we said was about $285 for the average home. There's some of it already in there for the municipal buildings, a little bit, and then this will be on top of it. So, Connor, did you want to add anything to the nuance of that?
Sure, thank you, Dottie. And the finance director is 5 feet away from me and will interrupt me if I begin to get this wrong, but that's a really good question. And so when we build tax calculators for debt exclusions and things like that, there's obviously an underlying formula there that is at that time based on what average home values are. And so in testing the override calculator for this override, that was tested on the old Blanche Ames project website. It's actually called the Early Elementary School site because it's so old we didn't have a name for the building. It's from 2019. And so I apologize if anyone landed on that and said Blanche Ames is going to cost $800. It doesn't. Outside of a small amount, like a single-digit percentage of the project that's subject to MSBA closeout, Blanche Ames is already in your tax bill. And as you've said, when we forecast that for voters in 2019, the expectation was that the median home would see an impact of about $433 a year after the MSBA grant. We thankfully kept at work with that project, even though a pandemic hit, it was under budget, and so the actual cost is closer to $285 a year. There is currently a small amount of the Police Fire Public Works that was approved in 2021 and 2023 in people's tax bill, regrettably, for Police Fire Public Works. There's no state grant. Back to the question from a gentleman earlier about state advocacy, that's something we kick and scream about every single year. And it's why when you drive around Massachusetts, you see a lot of police, fire, and public works facilities in really unacceptably poor conditions because there's just no state money to support it. That means that's a larger tax impact. And when that project was being planned, one of the things that we took into account was the sunsetting of the debt for the building we're in now in the middle school. One of the benefits of a debt exclusion versus an operating override is debt exclusion is not permanent. Now, you're talking 20 plus years, so it can feel that way, but it does actually come off your taxes. And so the borrowing for the Police Fire Public Works is timed to come online as this and the middle school are paid off and that tax increase decreases. And so what we forecast for folks then was that the net impact by the time we fully borrow would be about $720 per year for your average home. That contract was awarded $9 million under budget, which we're happy about. We're going to work hard every day to keep it that way. Between that and getting better interest rates on our bonding than what we were expecting, we're currently forecasting that to be closer, to the mid sixes or less, which is still a significant impact. Some of that's already in the tax bill, and so the short answer is over the next 2 to 3 years, depending on the borrowing cadence and the cash flow for the project, there's probably $580 to $590 for the median homeowner spread out over those few years coming online for that project, which is net of the all of our aims in middle school being paid off. So that's significant. But Blanche Ames is already in there. This is currently under budget, and a portion of it's already in the taxes. So to your point, no, do not go back to a 2019 presentation, a 2021 or 23 presentation, and add all three of those up. That is fair to say what's your 5 plus, 6 plus year impact, but a lot of those things are already being funded.
And I think this is just one of those things that we've worked on with the community for years to identify that was a really important thing to do, is to get these buildings taken care of. We've already seen that if we were to build the Blanche Ames School now, just less than 5 years after we started with that, it would be millions of dollars more money. So while it might be a little bit tough for us right now, I guarantee you that if our young people are lucky enough to live in this community in 10 years, they're going to say, wow, that was really smart of them to do that at the time, because it's just going to, the prices never go down. We see an unbelievable cost escalation per square foot construction, even for the municipal buildings, which, are just getting shovels in the ground. The prices to start those now are hundreds of dollars more per square foot. So, I just want people to know there is a lot of thought that goes into this by the boards, but also by the community every time they affirm and they vote to support these. So I think that people can be assured that these are good decisions and thoughtful decisions and meaningful decisions. So with that, we're just going to head right to the votes if everybody's ready. And so the first one is for Article 1. This is the operating budget to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate or appropriate by transfer from available funds a sum of money to defray the town charges for the ensuing fiscal year, including salaries of the several elected and appointed officers of the town, including cost items for collective bargaining agreements, and make appropriations for the same as listed below, or take any other action relative thereto. And you'll see on the warrant, the total fiscal year 26 budget. This is the balanced budget without the override is $114,683,934. And so I would ask the select board to make a motion and a second whether you choose to recommend or not recommend. Have to include what? Oh, okay. To include and recommend.
So I move to include Article 1.
Include and recommend?
Oh, I thought you just were doing just include or
So procedurally here, the board does need, or at least in Easton, we always have a board vote to include articles in the warrant. I think it's important to point out that you kind of have these yes or no recommendations here. Even if you end up taking the position that you support the override alternative budget, even if that override alternative budget passes at town meeting, it could still fail on June 10th. And so we will be, from the administration perspective, recommending to voters that they adopt both. And the articles are written in a way as such that both are adopted by town meeting, hypothetically. And then if the override vote on the 10th is a no, the balanced budget will still go into effect in July. So use that information as you will for how you choose to recommend. I personally think if you take a negative recommendation on the first budget, that might perhaps be confusing. This is really just for public information, so you are free to recommend it and add some editorialization that as a backstop should the override fail, which is so. But procedurally, yes, we need the select board to vote to include. And if you're willing, you could just vote to include Article 1, 2A, and 2B now. And then the recommendations are going to be up to all of you. So I hope I didn't make that worse.
No, I really, I know how I feel about it, but I guess the way you described it, Connor, it's good for us to include and recommend from the select board.
That's my understanding as well.
So you're making a motion?
So that's my motion.
Second.
So that's Barger and Stacy, all in favor? Unanimous. Okay, Patrick, your turn. You get that?
Thankfully, don't have to include, I'm pretty sure. So I'm looking for a motion to recommend. Second. That was quick. All those in favor? Any opposed? Unanimous.
So that was, you made the motion, Patrick, and who seconded it?
Mike made the motion, and Robert seconded.
So Michael made the motion and Robert seconded? Oh, okay. Did you get that, Elizabeth? Excellent. All right, school committee.
So are we
You have already...
making a motion to include and recommend?
No, you already included it, so you're just making the motion to recommend.
Okay. Okay, so who wants to make the motion to include, no, to recommend, is it just Article 1?
Are we doing all three articles?
Just Article 1. and
Just
then we'll go-
Article.
I move to include, I move to recommend Article 1.
Percio, second.
Okay, all in favor? Anyone opposed?
Did you have a second also?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. We are all in favor.
Okay. So now we're going to go to Article 2A. This is the creation of the Override Reserve Stabilization Fund contingent on the passage of Article 2B to see if the town will vote to establish pursuant to General Law Chapter 40S 5B, an override reserve stabilization fund for purposes of defraying future town and school wages and insurances contingent upon the passage of the alternate override budget detailed in Article 2B and associated Proposition 2.5 referendum question, or take any other action relative thereto.
I would ask among the boards present tonight that unless there is opposition to voting them collectively, that your vote be collective on 2A and 2B because they're woven together.
And 2B is the alternate fiscal year 2026 operating budget contingent on passage of the override election, to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate or appropriate by transfer from available funds a sum of money to defray the town charges for the ensuing fiscal year, including the salaries of several elected and appointed officers of the town, and make appropriations for the same as listed below, with said appropriations to be made in place of any funds appropriated under Article 1, provided that the appropriation of funds and adjustment of funding sources described under the contingent override budget approval column of this Article 2B as printed below shall be contingent upon the passage of a Proposition 2.5 referendum question under General Laws, Chapter 59, Section 21C, and that if such referendum fails, any appropriations made under Article 1 shall remain in place or take any other action relative thereto. So that's the long way of saying that if this Article 2 fails, we will stay with the original non-override budget. So Craig, would you like to make a motion?
So I move to include and recommend 2A and 2B.
Second.
All in favor? Unanimous. Patrick?
For the Finance Committee, do we have a motion to recommend Article 2A and 2B? All those in favor? Any opposed? Thank you.
Okay, and Lauren?
Okay, School Committee, who would like to make a motion to recommend and include Article 2A and 2B?
I move to recommend and include Article 2A and 2B, Wiseman.
Percio, second. All in favor? Unanimous.
Great. Anything else, Connor?
Agenda somewhere in here.
Sure.
I'm being sincere, we probably a minute.
Okay. So we need a vote for the Select Board for the May 19th, 2025 annual town meeting signing of the warrant.
So moved, Barger.
Second, Stacy.
Barger and Stacy, all in favor? Unanimous? Is the discussion and possible vote of the Select Board final language for the operational override ballot for the special town meeting election, June 10th, 2025, from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. at Oliver Ames High School.
Thank you, Dottie. An important procedural point here. The Select Board voted to schedule the operating override election a couple months ago, I feel, in order for the clerk's office, who's running numerous back-to-back elections, to have the calendar and for voters to know those dates. The board does need to specify what the language on that ballot will be. And so we've reviewed this with legal counsel to make sure that it's in accordance with Department of Revenue regulations. And it is it comports with Article 2A and 2B, and it's in your override recommendation. It's in the budget book. The recommended language for the ballot, if anyone on the board would like to make the motion, is shall the Town of Easton be allowed to assess an additional $7,300,000 in real estate personal property taxes for purposes of funding the operating budgets of the town and public schools, and funding a specialized override reserve stabilization fund for wages and insurances for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2025.
All in favor? Unanimous. Terrific. That's it. Any closing words?
Just for anyone who toughed it out to the very end, that was just the board making formal the language that's on the ballot. It is ultimately still going to be the choice of voters on May 19th and June 10th. So really appreciate the folks who came, those who are following along. We have all this information available to you. It is your community's finances. Please stay in touch with us. Come to the Pace Open House on Wednesday, and we'll see you at town meeting on the 19th.
Okay, can I get a motion to adjourn from the Select Board?
So moved, Barger.
Second, Stacy.
Barger and Stacy, all in favor? Unanimous.
Can I get a motion to adjourn from the Finance Committee? All those in favor? Thank you all.
School Committee, motion to adjourn.
So moved, Wiseman. Percio, second.
All in favor? Unanimous.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.